OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
Right, a very good morning to you this Monday morning. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. We hope you're keeping well. Nathan, good morning to you.
Morning, Jared.
You were on commentary duty yesterday for the game, which turned out to be a bit of a damn squib.
Yet again. There's something about these two sides that seem to bring out the dullness in each other. When you look back over the last 2-3 years of the Premier League, generally, that trio of Liverpool, Manchester City, Tottenham, when they meet in games, it's fast-paced, it's enthralling, technically it's as good as you get. But for whatever reason, Manchester United and Liverpool, it rarely seems to happen. And yesterday was another case of that. I didn't think it was as bad as some people were saying. There were times in the first half where Liverpool looked very good without any cutting edge in the final third. And as the game wore on, Manchester United just seemed to get better and better and created big opportunities. But it was Liverpool in containment mode at the moment, just to sort of stem the flow of the losses where they're not in any sort of form at all and are just trying to hang on in there. And for Manchester United, it felt like a bit of a missed opportunity. When you look at that Liverpool defence of Fabinho and Jordan Henderson, two centre midfielders playing at centre back, and they were a bit too passive. I'm reading this morning in The Athletic that United, the talk ahead of it was that they smelt blood, that this was their opportunity as league leaders. They didn't play like that. The first half an hour, they stood off. They are in a difficult position where they're having to play both Fred and McTominay as holding players, which means Pogba's playing out of position. That seemed to hand Liverpool the initiative rather than going there when you smell blood and actually going in for the kill good and early. I thought United will look at this as more of a missed opportunity than Liverpool.
I think, though, if you're Manchester United, though, and you've come from where you've come from, you know, this whole point about them being 30 points behind the last time they left Anfield and they're now ahead on goal difference or whatever it is, I think you've got to be feeling pretty good about yourself. You've got to feel that, like, this is a stepping stone along the way. I think Andy made the point last week, you know, in the league, perform well against your direct rivals, and then it's how you do in the other games that really matters. All of a sudden, Manchester United come away from that game going, all that stuff that we've been telling ourselves, it's true. We are legitimate title contenders from this point forward.
But this is not Liverpool. What we saw yesterday is not.
This is Liverpool. No, you're right. And so, but that's 2020, 2021 Liverpool. When we look back, it's going to be at a team who are dropping points against the good sides and who couldn't raise the game in the big games.
I think they've raised the game in the big games. I think all the big games so far this season, Liverpool have raised the game except yesterday. But I think from Manchester United's point of view, to go with the old John Giles line of taking each game in its merits, that fine if you're going to Anfield against the Liverpool of last season and coming away with that result. But they're missing 3 centre halves. This is as makeshift a team as you will find. And they couldn't go and take advantage of that. So, yeah, United are coming from a position where they've made big strides over the last year and Liverpool have fallen way back. But go in for the kill. Go and try and take advantage of that, because what is maybe Ole Gunnar Solskjaer finishing second behind Manchester City is a great success. But this is an unusual season. Go and try and win the league in this unusual season. Who knows what's going to happen? So I think when you look at that back two, who Fabinho was outstanding, Henderson was rarely tested, that United didn't create enough opportunities, despite the couple of chances in the second half for Fernandes and Pogba that Alisson did brilliantly to save from, that they didn't get Pogba into the game enough, they didn't get Rashford into the game enough, they didn't get Fernandes into the game enough, and I just expected more from United considering the position Liverpool are in, where they're without Virgil van Dijk, who day by day is becoming a greater loss for Liverpool, and you do feel the defining moment of the season was going to be when Jordan Pickford took Virgil van Dijk out of the game, because his loss has just been catastrophic from Liverpool. Not just in a defensive...
Are Liverpool not giving themselves a free pass there with the whole Van Dijk went out and we're finished as a result of that? Like, Fabinho was excellent. Fabinho's in your team of the year. So that, you know,
but they're not just missing Van Dijk. They're missing Van Dijk, Gomez, and Joel Matip.
Okay, so buy a centre back if you need to. But hang on a second, because this gives the rest of the Liverpool team a bit of a free pass. Trent Alexander-Arnold, not very much in form at the minute. Who of the midfield trio that they've been leaning on has been particularly good? He started somebody in the game yesterday who you said it was his first start of the season, and is it his first start in a year? And then the forward trio, how well are any of those playing at the moment? Like, this isn't just on Van Dijk. If Van Dijk seems to be Samson's hair, and it's been cut, and all of a sudden the whole thing has gone to rubbish. But like,
yeah.
But
you're talking about the most influential player in the Premier League being ruled out for the season. So you got to remember, Fabinho's been brilliant at centre back, but Fabinho was brilliant in the middle of midfield. So Fabinho's gone from midfield. Jordan Henderson has gone from midfield. Consistently in every big game last season, Jordan Henderson was right up there among Liverpool's best players. So instead of having Thiago coming in to midfield for his first game at Anfield yesterday and having Jordan Henderson and the energy of Henderson alongside him, he has Xherdan Shaqiri, who hasn't played, as you say, in over a year. Now, Shaqiri actually did very well, and they needed a little bit more creativity in the midfield anyways. But Van Dijk's loss has forced them into a total change of the way they set up. And I do feel that Liverpool's attack is reliant on their defence and that high line and his range of passing. And Alexander-Arnold has been the biggest loser out of that, because while Alexander-Arnold is brilliant at those crossfield balls to Robertson's benefit, you don't see it quite as often from Robertson. It was always a little knock back to Van Dijk. He'd ping it over to Alexander-Arnold. You're constantly almost putting in the defence in this sort of wave machine where they're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that's gone because, well, Jordan Henderson's playing on the left of the centre-back pairing. Like, he doesn't have a left foot. So they don't have any sort of range of passing at all now. So I think it's had a knock-on effect for every part of the side. Their entire tactical setup is at a loss because of Van Dijk not being there. And then you throw in that you're missing Gomez and you're missing Matip, and suddenly two of your first choice midfielders aren't there either. And Diogo Jota, who had come in, he made that signing.
He's picking Henderson by choice at centre-back. He has the kids that he can play there and move Henderson forward if he wanted to, but obviously he doesn't trust them. And for whatever reason, they've made this decision not to sign a centre-back with a league title on the line. Why is that?
There's still time. I think there is still time for them to sign that centre-back between now and the end of January. And it is rare that clubs go out on the 1st of January and bring somebody in. But it will be a huge, huge error, I feel, if Liverpool don't go and sign a centre-half. Because what you lose by bringing Henderson out of the midfield, it's just exasperating the problem. Because you can put Reece Williams in and you can put Nat Phillips in, and it's clear he doesn't trust them for a long period of time. That actually, if it stays like this, Henderson will play a lot of games, because Matip, even if he gets back fully fit, hasn't shown that he can play 2 games in a week, and Liverpool are going to have 2 games in a week every single week between now and the end of the season. So it would be a huge, huge issue if they didn't go and sign a centre-back. And it may well end up costing them a Premier League title. And, yeah.
So we've gone a bit long on this because we're going to get to David Meyler in a couple of minutes, and we also have Andy Mitten with us as well. So we'd love to hear from you this morning if you're a Liverpool or a Man United fan. 087 9 180 180 is the number. How is it the absence of Virgil van Dijk's fault that Firmino, Mane and Salah are missing chances?
It's not even that they're missing chances is the problem for Liverpool. They're just not creating enough chances. And I just think that the way Liverpool, the pace that they can get the ball back in when Van Dijk is there, is gone with the high line that they play when Van Dijk is there. Everton just clicks into gear a little bit more. They're also losing Fabinho and Henderson from midfield, and the 3 of them are having a dip. I know Salah gets the brunt of it consistently. I thought he was the best of the front 3 yesterday. Like, Firmino hasn't been at it probably for a year at this stage, but because he chips in and because he works very hard, there's a feeling that he's the glue that connects it all together. Mane isn't scoring goals. He's got 6 Premier League goals so far this season. He had a couple of glimpses of him yesterday, but wasn't really shown for the ball at times. So the 3 of them are probably having a dip of form at the exact same time. And like, yesterday was the first time in over 2 years that they didn't score at Anfield. 3 Premier League games without a goal. And it was right at the start of the West Brom game before that they scored in the Premier League. So listen, it's too early to say they're in full-blown crisis. But when you're the Premier League champions and you're going through this sort of a dip, you're going to have to face a huge amount of questions, and they somehow need to find a way out of it because, all right, they got Burnley coming up on Thursday night, but over the next month then, they've got Tottenham, they've got Everton, they've got Manchester City, they've got Leicester, they've got United again next weekend in the FA Cup, they've got Champions League against Leipzig, that they need to turn this around very quickly, or suddenly it ends up in a bit of a lost season.
Do you pick the full team against United in the Cup next week to try and get them back on track, or do you let everybody have a rest?
I don't think so. I think you've got to prioritise. And Klopp generally rests players regardless of the opposition. He's done it even in league games against Everton when he feels that players need a rest, that the magnitude of the game changes things. But they're playing Spurs the following Thursday. They've got Burnley this Thursday. It'd be madness to go with a full side against Manchester United at the weekend. Maybe if you lose to Burnley on Thursday night.
Well, and look, that would be full-blown crisis, right? That's the point where you're saying this is that precipitates them buying a centre-back the next day, I think, does it?
Possibly. But again, is it too late by then?
Maybe. It's 7:40 this morning. I did want to very briefly, Chris Barrett announced his retirement from Mayo over the course of the weekend. Which of those Mayo players are you going to miss the most, Nathan? As a true, full-blooded Mayo Gael, which one are you missing the most?
I think David Clark is the one you miss most right now because he's just been such a mainstay. All of them, though, a little bit of your heart is ripped out each time they step away. I'd hope Chris Barrett might stay, but obviously he's playing his club football in Dublin now, and we don't know what's gone on behind the scenes, whether there's been a sort of culling of sorts, but it fits in with what's happening in other counties as well, that a lot of players, for whatever has happened in the world, have sort of looked at it. Maybe it wasn't as enjoyable last year as they would have hoped with no crowds, and we're not going to have full stadiums. Expect this coming summer either. It's a big loss from a training session. And I think back to Tommy Walsh often talking about, staying that extra year in Kilkenny because he felt he owed it to the young lads coming through, that he felt he owed it to them to be around training and make training as tough as possible and use all that experience so that when they went out on the pitch, they were as good as they could possibly be, even though he knew that he was in that position with Cody, that no matter how well he played at training, he probably wasn't going to get in the 15, that a lot of those Mayo players, maybe that was the season just gone, that they did that and that they brought through this new generation. And actually, Warren was happy enough now for them to step away. But you can't really fault any of them for the effort they put in. Again, like Chris Barrett living in Dublin. I know he's transferred up to Clontarf, but last 5-6 years, 3 times a week, up and down for training. It's going to get you in the end. Yeah, it's no crack at all. And look, the travel, we keep talking about the impact that the travel has on teams like Mayo and other counties around, the impact that it has on finances and on the time that they actually spend together and all that kind of stuff. And it is huge. It needs to be factored in as well. Just want to very briefly, before we get to David Meyler this morning, talk about a story that's in the back of the Mail this morning. It's actually Paddy Power's From the Horse's Mouth podcast. They've had Niall Quinn as a guest. I haven't spoken to Damien and I haven't spoken to Alan Kelly, but yes, I'm surprised. My first thought on that, this is talking about Damien Duff and Alan Kelly stepping away from Stephen Kenny, from his management team. My first thought on that, and I don't know how right or wrong this is, but if you're not happy in what you're doing, where you're going, you're right to walk away. Everybody wants Irish football to do well, and there is real problems underneath the tin. They're boiling up all the time, and hopefully in some shape or form a window of opportunity from government to go further. OK, the rescue package is most welcome and that settles the thing down, but I would hope as the next election comes around, the football will be on the potential TD's list of things to say, OK, can we kick it on? Because it is an important sport. It is important. The numbers playing each week, we're all looking for something to aspire to. We want everything to be better, and personally, until we have our own 5-star academy up in Abbottstown with all the best players being treated the way all the players their ages are in the countries like Spain, Italy, England, etc., we're always going to have problems at the elite level and right the way down to grassroots. So he doesn't kind of say that, he says they're right to step away if they weren't happy. Yeah, I think it's hopeful in the least to say that the government may look at football as an opportunity. I think they look at the FAI as the perfect height for kicking over the coming years, unfortunately. Maybe there's something there when he talks about Damien Duff and goes off on that tangent that's been out there, that maybe Duff wasn't fully in line with maybe the FAI's underage policy and had his own views on that and just fed into a general frustration that he had with the FAI that was exasperated and amplified by Videogate and having to go in and answer questions where he felt there was nothing to answer. So, yeah, it's a shame that Damien Duff is gone. What they need now probably is a little bit of leadership and for Jonathan Hill to come out and be more of a public face. I know maybe he feels and was appointed on we've had a public face in charge of the FAI and that somebody quietly doing that work behind the scenes, but there's just so much happening around the senior team at the moment that actually a senior official coming out and saying, this was completely overblown and Damien Duff is gone and Alan Kelly's gone, but Stephen Kenny still has whatever he wants resources-wise, we're there from. Whereas that hasn't happened yet. It'd be good if they would just appoint those replacements relatively quickly in the next couple of weeks with names that we know and recognise, or with people who have a good track record, or the best people for the job. And I think that would settle things down. While there is a gap, while there is still those positions to be
filled, there's room for speculation. And, you know, I see that a row has developed between different factions amongst the football writers. Your football writers' annual dinner obviously can't go ahead at the moment, Nathan, but the seating plan would have been very interesting.
Next year, hopefully, if there's one reason that we need a vaccination, if you have any family members there that you know that could get us top of the list there, please do let us know, because the football writers need that get together. Yeah, it's gone quiet on the assistant manager role, and obviously John O'Shea and Lee Carsley were linked. One thing I was thinking was it's not as attractive as a gig as it once was during COVID times either, because you basically are coming over for 2 weeks and you're locked into camp. You don't get to see anybody. You're having to leave your family behind. You're going into this little bubble. That the enjoyment factor, I would say, unfortunately, because of COVID around international camps is way, way down.
100%. It's 7:46. David Meyler joins us next on OTB AM. Let's hear from Brian Kerr. He was in commentary duty alongside Nathan for OTB yesterday and reckons there's something wrong with Mo Salah.
Obviously, Salah, the question mark, has his head been torn by one of the super clubs in Europe offering him crazy money to leave Liverpool? Is that a factor in his concentration levels? I don't know, but he's certainly not as efficient in his taking the goal scoring opportunities as he was, and neither is Mane or Firmino. But there may be a level of burnout to a degree with them as well. There's so much pressure. Any sort of a challenge match for them, a match that Klopp sees that it could be difficult for them, he always plays those front three. It's not like there's 4 for 3. It's not like it's Shaqiri or one of the other 3. Shaqiri hasn't been involved. Origi hasn't been involved. Minamino hasn't been involved. The one is Jota. And unfortunately, Jota got hurt so many matches ago that he doesn't give any of them an opportunity to be rested, or neither is he there to put pressure on one of them for their place.
Yeah, so that's Brian Kerr speaking yesterday with Joe. David Meyler, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, Joe.
You had fairly similar queries. You tweeted yesterday, thoughts on Salah's performance? Something's not right with him at the moment. What is it?
To be honest, I don't know. Obviously listening to Brian there, you wonder if that's true with the transfer speculation. Has his head been turned? Look, of course, he's won the Premier League and the Champions League and the World Club Cup. Maybe is he looking for a new challenge? I don't know, but he certainly doesn't look, in the last 3-4 games, the Mo Salah that, a lot of Liverpool fans are well used to. He's still top scorer in the Premier League, but he just, I know he's one of those players that, I think if I was playing with him, it's like you love him or you hate him at the time during a game. There's a lot of times the ball goes into him, he gets hold of it, he tries to get turned, and then he turns over possession. He'll do that 3-4 times, and on other occasions he'll get the ball, he'll kind of skip by someone, stick in the top corner from 30 yards. You think like, wow, like that's the Salah we know. And at the moment, it's not just Salah, I suppose. All the front three of Mane, Firmino and Salah aren't playing, to the level that we're used to seeing them. And it is a concern. Of course, Jota coming back would be a massive plus because he'll put the pressure on them. But at the same time, he's now going to, he's been out 2-3 months. So what level, how long is it going to take him to get back up to speed to be at the level he was at? But look, it could be a case of burnout. Of course, look, somebody, as you said there, I did put it out on Twitter. Somebody mentioned that 2 of the 3 of them had COVID. We don't know if it's had long-term effects on them, that, they're still getting back up to the full speed that we know that they can get to. But it certainly is a concern for Jurgen because they have been the match winners for Liverpool for the past 2-3 seasons, and at the moment they're not firing.
About 2 months ago we talked a good bit about Firmino, and that was when he was scoring the goals, and it was like,
I know.
Imagine what's going to happen if he continues to do this. But his goal scoring has dropped off. His decision making seems to have dropped off a little bit as well.
Yeah, like a couple of times. The one thing that everybody, I think, every Liverpool fan would say about Firmino is he's not selfish. But a couple of times yesterday, the ball fell to him. And he's in his right mind to shoot in the position he's in. But there was one occasion where Andy Robertson made a great run the left-hand side. Maybe you could just slide him into a better position to shoot. But he had probably the opening 20 minutes for Firmino. And then he kind of just drifted in and out of the game. The ball that was going up to him was coming off him. It was just, I don't know, look, it's very easy for me to sit there and watch and say this, you know, when you're playing in a game like that, you know, you mightn't have looked it, but the intensity will be high, do you know what I mean, demands. And also at the same time, you've got to, like, as much as I was quick to criticise Salah, you've got to give Luke Shaw credit, you've got to give Harry Maguire credit, Lindelof credit, Wan-Bissaka. You know, they defended really well. They frustrated them. Anytime the ball kind of went forward, they were able to nullify their attacks. So there is a bit of a case of that as well, that, you know, Manchester United defended really well, and they deserved their clean sheet. Liverpool didn't do enough to score, and they didn't create enough chances.
He did change it at one stage during the game yesterday, Klopp, to probably get Salah a bit more involved, and almost went with Firmino a bit deeper and Salah on the left, Mane on the right. It was only for a short period, and it did get them a bit more involved. But is that what needs to happen for Burnley, for Tottenham coming up, that actually a bit of a change in system to somehow try and spark them back into life? Or do you just trust that this has worked brilliantly for us for 3 years, European champions, Premier League champions, that you trust the talent of the players to turn this around within the same system?
Well, it goes back to that old saying, doesn't it? Don't fix it if it isn't broke. Of course, look,
is it broke?
I don't think it's broke, no. It's 4 games. Yes, they've dropped 9 points, but at the same time, we have to give them credit for, you know, as much as we look at Liverpool's home form, I think that's 68 games now unbeaten. That's, you know, remarkable. Of course, look, the last 4 games, you know, the Southampton game, of course, look, they're a team that will always have the potential, certainly under Hasenhüttl, that they could beat you. But then Newcastle, West Brom, you're kind of thinking, well, we've got to be beating them. Of course, Manchester United, if you saw Jurgen Klopp speak after the game, he said they're high-flying form. We're kind of going through, you know, a sticky patch. So, you know, he was kind of, it seemed to me like he was almost happy that they didn't lose. Like the second half was more Manchester United than it was Liverpool. But do you change it? I don't think you do. Like the swapping Salah and Mane, look, that's just, wingers do it all the time. Of course, look, we're not used to really seeing with Liverpool, but at the same time, like Salah couldn't get the beating of Luke Shaw, but then I look at him and I think, is he the type of player to go at someone 1v1? He doesn't do it often. I don't think it's in his, you know, skill set to be the one to drop the shoulder and beat a man. I think Luke or Sadio Mane has that, and at times he tried to get the ball when they did switch and go at Luke Shaw, but Luke Shaw dealt with it. Like by all accounts, he was man of the match yesterday. He put in a terrific performance. But is it something they'll look at changing? Maybe. You know, when Jota comes back, it gives him a different dynamic. He could then play Salah or Mane through the middle. He might take out Firmino. You know, it is an interesting one. But at the same time, I wouldn't be hitting the panic button. You know, 4 games doesn't change 4 seasons. They've been phenomenal in the goals they've scored. Certainly Salah and Mane. I wouldn't be. It is, look, they're down to 4th in the table. Obviously, Man City have the game in hand. They win that, they go top of the table. Then there'll be 4 points off them. But there still is a long way to go. Like we're not even at the halfway point yet.
We were chatting a little bit earlier on, David, about the impact that Virgil has had. And okay, fair enough. Obviously, he's a key player and he's hugely important. But it happened a while ago now, and we're in the middle of a transfer window. So you've got opportunities and you've had enough time to try and deal with him going. I don't buy the fact that Virgil is responsible for the front 3 not playing well, or that you don't have other midfielders who can make up for Fabinho having to drop back to centre-back.
Definitely.
I'm not buying that it's just Virgil that's the cause of everything at the moment.
No, it's not. Look, Fabinho is slotted straight in centre-half, and he's looked like he's played there all his career. You know, it's not been Virgil. Of course, at the same time, Virgil is a massive miss. Him playing centre-half would obviously release Fabinho. I apologise if you can hear my son crying. Fabinho would be back in midfield, but at the same time, you can't use that as an excuse. Yes, he's a loss. You know, on the pitch, obviously, his leadership, certainly I think the way he plays, in the calmness he brings to the side. I think the bigger one for me would probably be Henderson in his style, that when he's playing centre-half is kind of affected, because if he's playing in middle midfield, then he brings that energy, that leadership, and he drives the team forward. He's proper going for it this morning.
He's that upset about the 9 points dropped in the last 4 games. Look, this is happening to all of us all the time at the moment, so we don't mind that whatsoever.
I know. And the worst thing was I just spoke to my wife 30 seconds before, and I said, right, I said, I'm going live there now in a minute. And he's been spot on all morning. He's just had his breakfast. He's calm out. He's got nursery soon, and he's kicking off like a madman now.
It happens to the best of us, I think. I think everybody feels it too at the moment. On the point of Henderson, right? Are neither of the kid centre backs good enough to baby through 90 minutes against United at the moment?
Well, my pals asked me yesterday, if you were a young fella, like obviously the two in question are Phillips and Williams, and I then said, do you know what? No, I wouldn't be aggrieved. I don't think they have the right to be aggrieved after their two performances. Certainly, Williams played in the FA Cup, and then Phillips played in the last league game, which should be Newcastle, and they didn't play well. The distribution on the ball was poor. And then I was saying, you don't have a right, because if you were to go to the manager and feel like, look, you're dropping in a midfielder, of course, look, forget about Henderson being captain and the experience he brings to the team. It is a kick in the teeth, don't get me wrong, but I don't think they have a leg to stand on because their performances haven't been that good. The example I could probably use, if you look at Trent Alexander-Arnold when he made his debut a few years ago against Manchester United because Nathaniel Klein was injured, he put his name, in the team sheet. He didn't want to be dropped. He played well and consistently played well, and it was kind of like, oh my God, we've got this new young right back who's brilliant. These two lads haven't hit. Of course, look, on their debuts in the games of the Champions League or whatever, they played well, but they've not really stamped their authority in the side that they look like they're a seasoned professional ready to go. So I wouldn't... It is tough on them, but at the same time, I don't think they have the right. And that's the demands that come with a team like Liverpool, that, you've got to be at your very best all the time. Of course, somebody would hit me with the argument, the front three aren't at the best, but I think they've enough credit in the bank over the last 3-4 seasons of what they've done and what they've achieved, that they can afford to have 2-3 games off.
Nathan, your argument a little bit earlier on, what difference would it have made to have Henderson in the middle of midfield yesterday? Nathan?
You're asking me, you're asking David?
Yeah.
I think that he has set the tempo in every big game that Liverpool played last season, whether it was United, Tottenham, that in these 100-mile-an-hour clashes, that he was the one who drove Liverpool forward, I thought yesterday Thiago was brilliant, but a lot of it was quite deep at times, a lot of it was sideways, and actually Henderson is the one who brings them 10 yards further up the pitch, and the pressure just becomes incessant, wave after wave. The teams can't hold out for that long, and that while Shaqiri played well and is a more creative midfielder, that in those games where it is frantic, that Henderson, that seems to be where he's at his very, very best. Where, listen, he did really well yesterday at centre-back, didn't put a foot wrong, but for the way Liverpool want to play with the calmness of Thiago and his passing ability, you actually need the other side of Wijnaldum and Henderson as well in those type of matches that Shaqiri's never going to be able to provide. I don't think anyone else in that Liverpool midfield can provide what Henderson does.
So I'd agree. I think with the way he plays, you've got three different types of holding midfielders in Henderson, Thiago, and Fabinho. Of course, look, Fabinho probably is going to play centre-half the rest of the season, but when Henderson plays in the middle, it is that energy he brings. And as Nathan said, when it is frantic, he's the one that's kind of flying around, just nicking the ball and keeping them ticking over. Like, Thiago is an exceptional ball player, there's no doubt in that. He's a world-class midfielder. But at times, you just see him, he kind of gets on the ball and it's flamboyant. He wants to, try and pull off that incredible pass. Yeah, for the opening 25 minutes, he ran the complete game. Then he drifted out of it where it became, as Nathan said, it became frantic. It was up and down. If you look at, just the last kind of 5-10 minutes of half time, it was kind of like a bit of a basketball game. And then certainly second half, Manchester United going into the game. I think with Henderson in there, he brings that energy. The massive thing he does is he allows the fullback, to get forward. It's the way he covers Trent Alexander-Arnold. He is massive to Trent in the way he plays. So that when Jordan can obviously cover over, it allows Trent to get that extra 5, 10, 15 yards higher, where then he is in those dangerous places. At times there, Nathan's talking about he's playing sideways. Like, he's playing the ball out to Alexander-Arnold, who's, probably 10 yards deeper, who's not he's he's not as effective because he's not high enough that he's able to put those first time crosses into the box, to put it into those areas to create chances. But at the same time, Trent is also going through a very bad spell. It's the last few games is probably the worst I've seen him play. But at the same time, I would have loved. I did say this, Gerard, to you last week. I would have loved to have Henderson to play in the middle, and rather than Shaqiri play where he played, push Thiago, and I would have given, a young lad a spot at centre half, because I would have felt that United would have sat deeper and looked at counter attack. Now, albeit Jordan did play fantastic, he did really well stopping the counter attack. But I would have preferred to see him in midfield.
It seems like there's an aggressiveness about that team selection, the one that you have gone for there, that wasn't quite there with Klopp at the moment. Is Klopp kind of second-guessing himself because he's looking around and seeing so many of his star performers performing well below what they're capable of?
No, I wouldn't say he's second-guessing himself. Like, if you think about it, he brings Shaqiri in, who's not started a game since December 2019 in the league. I thought Shaqiri for the hour, whatever it was, 65 he played, I thought he did really well. He did look like the one who could probably unlock the defence with a cute through ball or whatever. I wouldn't say second-guessing himself. It would be interesting to see if he had a full 22 players fit and available, what 11 he would go with. Well, we kind of know the front three and the back four, but what kind of midfield he would decide to play with. That would be the interesting one, but I wouldn't say second guessing himself. No.
How do they get out of this then? What's the solution in the short term, and what's the solution in the medium term?
Yeah, well, look, the games are coming thin and fast. You don't have time to stop. You got to keep going. Like, as much as the Southampton, or not Southampton, sorry, Crystal Palace game. Liverpool obviously had loads of chances. They scored 7 goals, but they had 8 shots on target. It was one of those games where everything they did just seemed to go in. It's almost like everything up until the final third is brilliant, and then it's that last pass, or that little bit of spark, or that bit of magic where someone can drop a shoulder and create half a yard of space to shoot. If you looked at Harry Kane's goal yesterday, once Sheffield United turn over the ball, it's popped into him. He's got his back to play. He can shrug off the man, create a yard, and it's like bang, it's a goal. That's what the Liverpool front three aren't doing. Even if you looked at Firmino's chances yesterday, he's not striking the ball cleanly in those areas. The other one with Salah, where it falls and he's kind of tussling with Maguire. On another day, that falls, he can get it onto his left foot and he's getting a shot, clean shot off on target. But in the games that they've played, they haven't played great, but you have to, we're quick to point out that they're not firing at, what we're used to. But, Manchester United yesterday defended really well, and they did make it tough for Liverpool. So there's a bit of you've got to give them credit. United.
No, absolutely. I guess if it was just the United performance, you would do that. But it's the fact that it's all those other games in over recent weeks against definitely inferior sides. The West Broms of this world, where we do expect it. And the Burnley game is going to be all of a sudden very interesting. We've talked about this already this January, and you said your dad was like, "Look, go out and sign whoever." Have you? Where are you now on the sign somebody to try and save the league title?
Tough one, because obviously when we were speaking about that, we were talking about a centre half, but Liverpool have showed that they don't really need a centre half. They're more than able to go with Fabinho and Henderson. Obviously, we've got the 2 young lads. Matip, they're saying, will return to training today, tomorrow. I think the Manchester United game came too soon for him. So I think it's a case of they probably don't need one. I know people have said, Liverpool needs one to win the league, but it's just if you're going to sign a player now, you're kind of looking at, can we get a young and upcoming forward or something? To be honest, I don't know. I don't know what Liverpool miss. I think it's probably strength and depth where you have someone to push the front three. Of course, that is Jota, and look, he's on his way back. We don't know when he'll be back, but I wouldn't expect Jurgen to really sign anyone at the moment to push the front three. It's a case of, I think if he's going to do business, it's going to be someone who's definitely going to improve the squad, but it's not going to be a panic buy, or it'll probably more than likely be one for the future.
All right, David, good stuff. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
That's David Meyler giving us some thought there this morning. A reminder, of course, OTB AM live in association with Gillette. Good morning, start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Loads still to come. We're going to get Alan Quinlan's back row depth chart just around about 9 o'clock this morning. Mike Carlson's going to talk us through the divisional round weekend in the NFL. Text in, or on YouTube, sorry, Man United and Tampa Bay double jar Glazer time 2021. It's possible, says Wayne Ryan. It is possible because the Glazers' beloved Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Tom Brady are still standing after the weekend. We'll talk about that as well. We've got Andy Mitten talking Manchester United right after these.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio. Off the ball.
I heard a few of your teammates in defence talking about Zlatan, and did anything strike you about his play being on the same pitch as him?
The fella has obviously looked after himself so well. He was doing crate kicks over the height of my head during the warm-up, so for such a big man, he was like a ghost on the pitch. You couldn't pick him up.
Off the ball. Weeknights from 7 and weekends from 1.
This is OTB Sports Radio, live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
A quick look through the morning sports page. We'll tell you what's on otbsports.com first this morning. So Liverpool versus Manchester United, the player ratings from Anfield. Breed Stack set to make full recovery after a practice match collision in Australia. Yeah, really terrifying photographs yesterday, but the good news overnight is that they've diagnosed specifically broken vertebrae and no nerve damage. So she's expected to make a full recovery in 7 or 8 weeks' time. So that's great news that she's going to be okay. Solskjaer, we can play better, but to come away with a point shows how far we've come. Liverpool have lost their spark, said Roy Keane last night on telly. And the Luke Shaw redemption, Liverpool Manchester United review with Brian Kerr on that one as well. Some comments. Henderson being out of position was not the major issue. The front three have so much more mileage on the clock, as do the fullbacks. Liverpool are suffering from not rotating the team enough in lesser games. That's true, Oki. And without the 12th man, the fans, the energy the team goes after the 60th minute. Jota absence is immense too. So lots of people getting in touch on our YouTube this morning. The London Times, picture of Paul Pogba after his miss. Frustrations inspire Leach. Jack Leach is using his frustrations of the last year, in which he played only 2 first-class matches because of health problems, and the Premiership's 14-team plan. So rugby in England is talking about getting rid of relegation for a couple of seasons. The Daily Mail, I've already told you about this story. Niall Quinn, forget the title as Super City close in on top 6. Klopp warns his champions. Are they out of the title race? Is that? It's like forget the title as in don't worry about the title, don't think about it, don't become obsessed about it, Nathan. Is that what it is?
That Liverpool are out of the title race?
He says forget about it.
No, I don't think so.
Don't be thinking about it. Not like don't forget that we're going to win it, but just don't be thinking. The Daily Mirror.
I think Liverpool need to stay right in there somehow.
Yeah, down and droughts. Liverpool slipped to 4th after a third goalless display, as Klopp admits they could struggle to make the Champions League. Stones the Crows. City defenders a goal machine. All of a sudden, John Stones is coming good again. Something weird has happened in the pandemic. The Star, their back page. Don't panic. Klopp's relaxed about goal drought. Liverpool, Man United, slightly different. Boylan's terrifying ordeal. We wish Sean Boylan all the very best. He's recovered from COVID. Now 77. He's going to be part of the down underage backroom team in 2021. He says it was totally out of the blue. His weight dropped by 1.5 stone over less than a week, but he's made a full recovery. I was never feeling healthier. Fit as a fiddle. 10 kilos in 6 days. And he was in Blanchardstown in the James Connolly Hospital. The terror, the fear, it was uncanny, it was unreal. I was never afraid as anything. I was never as afraid of anything in my life, and I was always very happy. It's such a dangerous thing. So there you go on that one. And then there's a Daniel Kinahan story on the front of the Star, which obviously, I suppose, is a sports story these days. The front page of the Examiner is Paul Pogba beating the ground in disgust after having missed his chance. And Klopp starting to feel title pressure. Is he starting to feel pressure or what? I mean, this is an interesting. It's a new dynamic where he's the one to be got at in English football. Nathan,
I think he's got to be feeling the pressure when you look at what Manchester City are doing. First team this season to win 5 games in a row, so they win their game in hand. Liverpool are 4 points behind, and Roy Keane using the word they've lost their spark. But that's what happened to Manchester City last season. They lost their spark and they couldn't get it back. It's taken them a long, long time to get it back. So it's not a simple fix for Liverpool. I think David went into it quite well there, that there's many interconnecting parts that make Liverpool tick and click. And for whatever reason, that spark is gone. So it'll be quite a big effort from Klopp to somehow get that spark back.
Is there any fear of them crapping out to the point where they don't finish in the top 4?
I don't think so. I think there's too much talent there. I think the front three will come back at some stage.
Or one of them. That's the problem.
Yeah, and Jota's going to return as well over the next few weeks, you would expect. But it is that fixture list that if this dip was to continue and you find yourself, dropping points against Everton, Leicester, all your main rivals, Manchester City, it's going to be quite difficult.
The Irish Times front page is obviously that same picture of the shot that Pogba had that hit straight at Alisson. If he'd bobbled it off the ground and it had bounced up, or if he'd gone low to the far side, if he'd roofed it, then there might have been a chance for it. But Klopp unconcerned after drawing another blank. And then Malky Clerkin has a column about Eamon Ryan and his legacy. Build up to Melbourne in turmoil with 72 tennis players isolating ahead of the Australian Open. So a lot of them not going to be able to train for the 2 weeks. So you might have an outsider, a local even, who is able to train, who will have a bit of an advantage for that one. Back page of The Sun. Stones throw from top. 50th birthday treat for Pep. John Stones get Pep Guardiola the perfect birthday present with a super double as they beat Crystal Palace 4-0. Lenny must go. John Hartson says Celtic must do a clear out, starting with boss Neil Lennon. This is the first of his former teammates really to call for change, I think. I mean, sorry, maybe some of his others have as well, and if I'm doing a disservice to that, then I don't mean to, but it does look like there will be a new Celtic manager next season. Who's it going to be?
Who the next Celtic manager is? Eddie Howe?
Eddie Howe's been backed into 5-1 on last night. Are people going to look at what has happened to, if you do a good job there, how you can parlay that into a good job in the Premier League, and look at the path that has been well trodden, and how well Leicester are going at the moment with Brendan Rodgers? If you're Eddie Howe, you're looking at that going, yeah, I could do that. I
think Brendan Rodgers had a far better body of work going to Celtic than Eddie Howe has, as good as the job he did at Bournemouth. There's opportunities there at Celtic, and now you're going to be coming into a different position where you're going to be the one who wins and wrestles back the title from Rangers. It never really happened for Neil Lennon, and Neil Lennon never really got the opportunities that he probably felt he deserved down in England when he had all that success with Celtic to start with. I think it's an opportunity for someone like Eddie Howe because of the pressure and expectation that's there at Celtic. And I think if he did win the title back, he would get probably a lower ranking Premier League job, but I don't think he's going to go and get a Leicester out of it.
It's hard to know. People, Cam on YouTube asking about Roy Keane at Celtic.
Well, it's the biggest name you could possibly get for Celtic, and maybe it's exactly what they need. There isn't, looking at the season that's just gone, actually, maybe it's not as straightforward as you think being the Celtic manager. It is the sort of club that may well look at Roy Keane and think it's the profile we want. It's going to give the energy to the supporters that we want. It's a very different type of appointment to an Eddie Howe, who is, I think, 100% a coach first and foremost, and will probably want and run an aspect of every part of the club, whereas Roy, you think you're just going in, you're getting a manager straight up, someone to reinvigorate these players, give them that bounce that he gave at Sunderland.
We'll talk a bit more about that a little bit later on. 14 minutes past 8 this morning here on OTB AM. You're very welcome if you just joined us. We've already done Liverpool with David Meyler. We're going to do Manchester United next. OTB AM live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Andy Mitten, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning. Okay, hope you are too.
How are you feeling as a Manchester United fan after a 0-0 draw at Anfield? Is there a little tinge of regret about the fact that the game was there to be won, or is it like, look, this is one mere sortie in a long war?
There is a tinge of regret, as you say. My first way to describe how I'm feeling would be relief and less nervous and anxious than I was 24 hours ago. I think Liverpool United games do that to you. I found myself incapable of looking forward to the match, and yet at the same time really looking forward to the match. And then when I was watching the game, I was just thinking, just blow up, just end it now. And I'm thinking that after 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes. And then right towards the end, I thought United got much better in the second half. because it was all Liverpool in the first 30 minutes. But towards the end of both half, I thought United looked the more likely side to score a goal. I think a 0-0 draw at Anfield, I would have taken that before the match. But, you know, you football fans, you always want a little bit more. You always want to see your team win. And United had probably the two best chances of the game once they'd ridden that initial wave of Liverpool attacking at the start, which they've always done at Anfield. They've always done that against Manchester United. And Sir Alex Ferguson always said, just see out that initial wave of attack, let the crowd calm down a little bit, and then we can start to play. And I think even though there wasn't a crowd there, that's pretty much what United did.
Oh, there's Nathan ring back there. Andy, on that whole kind of sense of the team kind of growing into the match, is that just where Manchester United are at the moment, that until they have a league title under their belt, or until they have a major European trophy under their belt, they're a team who are building, and so therefore you can't really go to the champions and expect to boss them in the first half hour?
Yeah, I think if United would have won at Anfield, even more people would have sat up and thought, wow, there's a real chance this team can win the league. But more realistic is probably the assessment that you just said. Liverpool are the champions. Liverpool had won, I think, 36 of their 38 previous home league games. I think Liverpool's squad and Manchester City's squad is still superior to Manchester United. And added to that, most of those players have got the experience of winning league titles. It's a title race United didn't expect to be in, and yet we speak with Manchester United being top of the league. So there's been a definite improvement, and every United fan, I think, welcomes that. But the team's still got some way to go. The manager still wants to bring a couple of players in, top quality players, the type which will maybe have the effect that Bruno had, even though Bruno didn't have a good game at Anfield, or Van Dijk had for Liverpool. And then there's games coming thick and fast, 2 a week all the time, and then the domestic cups start again. FA Cup against Liverpool again at the weekend, the Europa League next month. So it's going to be a pretty hectic schedule for all of the teams at the top. I still don't think United will win the league, but if there wasn't any hope, you might as well switch off now. I'm just enjoying watching the team in a title race.
When you saw the team that was named, did you anticipate Cavani being on the bench, or did you think that he actually would have been starting that game?
I was more surprised that Eric Bailly didn't start, that Victor Lindelof started, but I thought Lindelof actually had a decent game and justified that selection. I like Cavani. I've been pretty positive about him from when he was signed, and that was based on speaking to people who actually know him and watched him all the time, people in top-level professional football who knew far more about him than me, because I don't watch PSG every week, people who plotted to stop him. And he's not fully got going yet, and that's partly because he came in a little bit late, he had his ban, he's not been a first-choice striker, but I still think he offers something different. And when he came on, he does offer a different outlet. And one of those outlets was when Marcus Rashford was running across goal, and he was there in space, shouting for it. And I think everybody was, apart from Liverpool fans, was saying, just give him the ball. But I think Rashford was also moving away from goal, and it would have been quite difficult to pull that pass off. Cavani, if United are going to win the league, Cavani will have to come up with those amazing match-winning moments. And he did that at Southampton away, and you've got to do it a bit more. But you could say the same about Bruno, who was pretty anonymous, about Rashford. You've got to pull out those moments. I always remember Leicester going to Manchester City in the season that they won the league and bossing the game and beating City. And that was like a real title-winning performance. And United's form has been very good. They've been getting the wins, been exceptional away from home. It's not just Liverpool who've got that brilliant home record. United are approaching a year now without a defeat away in the league. There's a game at Fulham on Wednesday. Fulham are improved. Fulham held Liverpool. So it's looking good for United. I think the one slight worry, because football fans always want more, including my dad, who was moaning the morning after the treble win, saying it's just not good enough. Yeah, but Dad just won the treble. We're in Barcelona, it's sunny, just won the treble. Sorry, son, they didn't turn up, they were poor. Yeah, but just won the treble. Yeah, but I think with football fans, you see Manchester City looking pretty good, winning all the time, deserved their win at Old Trafford. They've got Kevin De Bruyne, probably the best player in the league, and maybe City are more of a worry for United now than Liverpool are, because Liverpool are out of form and struggling to score.
In terms of Bruno's performance, what's going on there? Is that just a fatigue issue? Is it everybody knows exactly what the way that he plays now? There's enough videotape on him. Is this going to be an automatic kind of, this is technically, if you're looking at a calendar year, this would officially be the start of his second season now, kind of, or should we just automatically expect a slump? What's your take on that?
I don't know any footballer in the history of world football who's consistently brilliant week after week. Lionel Messi was sent off last night and he's the best player in the world. It was disappointing to see his performance. He was one of the players at Anfield where you thought you've got to turn up and shine in a huge game like this, and he didn't. He was pretty slack in possession. Creatively, he wasn't as effective as he normally is, and yet he still had two of the best chances. He had the free kick, which went just wide in the first half, and then he had the shot which he side-footed across, and Alisson did one of several very good saves. I think you've got to accept he didn't have a good game, but I think it'd be really unfair to say this amounts to anything more than one bad game. If he has two or three bad games, then people will start to say he's looking tired, he's playing too many matches, but he's had one bad game, and I'm sure he'll want to play against Fulham. He looked really annoyed to be taken off, and you want that. Yeah. You want that. You want players to think that they can still produce a moment of magic and win a game. And he's probably disappointed in himself as much as the decision.
Andy, just on the front three for Manchester United at the moment and maybe the lack of goals, and it probably adds to the confusion as to where United are, because it feels as though there is still the possibility for big improvement within this 11 when you look at what they did after the restart. What's going on that Rashford has this inconsistency? Martial has 2 league goals all season. Greenwood has 1 and is getting a minute at the end of these big games. Is it just maybe similar to Liverpool, they're all having a slight dip at the same time, or is there something else going on in the way that United's set up that they're not creating the same type of chances?
It's a good point, and it's a fair comment that none of them are particularly in form. Greenwood probably completely overachieved last season, and he's getting used to having expectations put on him now. Martial, 2 goals, not good enough. Marcus Rashford, 1 goal in the league at Old Trafford, not good enough. But then his total goals tally is pretty impressive. He scored a lot of goals in Europe. I think there's a bit of revisionism with some fans in, you think that, Dennis Law was always great. And I was researching Dennis Law last week and coming across an article where fans were fuming because Dennis Law had been out of form for a long, long time. But nobody remembers that when they talk about Dennis Law. I can remember Wayne Rooney getting loads of stick because he wasn't playing or scoring. And that's happening a little bit at the moment. They're not playing particularly well. They did need to, you sort of hope that they'd shine and produce a match-winning moment at Anfield. Didn't happen. Martial needs to get to the levels he was at times last season. Rashford's had a very good season, but he's still not the top world-class player that he hopes to be. And I think he knows that as well. I think his aim this season is to score 30 goals, and I think he needs to be a bit more prolific in the league. It was frustrating watching him offside 4 times in the first half alone, because you can see that they're really close to that coming off, and his players know he's going to make the run, and his opponents know, and that's why so many United players were fouled breaking yesterday. They know there's a danger in Manchester United's rapid attack, and there's slight concerns about all of those players. I think with Rashford, it's just a natural. He has a very good game, and Then he has a game where he's not very good. Greenwood and Martial have both got to step up to the levels that they were at last season. And if they can do that, Manchester United will be 20% better, because the one good thing about this team is the goals are coming from different areas. You've seen Paul Pogba got the goal last week, Scott McTominay in the previous game. But there's been times where you think this team really needs a centre forward who scores lots of goals, like Van Nistelrooy. And Cavani's probably not going to be that man this season. He's not going to be the Zlatan in scoring all of those goals. The team are not as reliant on him because the way the team plays and sets up is slightly different. But it's good to have that Cavani option. He can come on, he can score, he does get into positions. Just think he needs a few goals as well. So I think you could add him to the three players that you've mentioned, but it's an interesting area, definitely. There's definite room for improvement.
What did you make of Pogba's role and performance? Obviously, if you have the legs of Fred and McTominay there, then Pogba plays a slightly different role, and sometimes it really suits, and sometimes the game can kind of seem to pass him by. And there was a bit of both in the 90 minutes yesterday.
There was, and he delights and frustrates me within the space of 5 minutes during matches. I thought he was man of the match against Burnley, where he got better and better. He started on the right yesterday, which isn't normal for him. He came more central. He'll produce that cross-field pass where you think, wow, no other player can do that, and then he'll lose possession a minute later. And then when he had that chance towards the end in the 83rd minute, his first touch was incredible. But then you want his second touch to be just as incredible and the ball to end up in the goal. Alisson did produce a good save. He's a top goalkeeper. Liverpool are top opponents as well. On balance, I'm happy to see Paul Pogba playing well and deserving to start in that United lineup. There wasn't any complaints when he started. Not really yesterday, and there would have been 6 weeks ago, and he's played himself into that position. What's happening off the scenes with him is that he's happier, he's fitter. He was afflicted by COVID, but most importantly, his confidence is up. And there were lots of times when his confidence was down, when he felt that he was sold a vision of Manchester United that never materialised, and that top players would come in around him, and didn't really happen because some of those players who came in didn't work out. But Bruno's working out. Pogba's probably not got the number of suitors that he did have. His agent's comments at the start of December were a bit panicked, and I think he realised that. He shouldn't have gone so far. I think it was pretty disrespectful, and it annoyed United fans a lot. It annoyed people within the club. United pay him a very, very good wage and have been very fair to Paul Pogba throughout all of these injuries. And I'm pleased that he's in a better place now, that he's playing well. Of course, you want him to score the winner at Anfield after 83 minutes. That's what football fans want. But to have Pogba in that place after Christmas, I mean, it's 2 years ago, I remember, going to Sevilla in the Champions League, nearly 3 years ago now, and his form was all over the place. He got dropped for Scott McTominay. There were issues with Jose Mourinho, and there aren't those issues now. And he's got a good relationship with his manager. And I think if he carries on playing well, you're going to start hearing more talk about, is there going to be a new contract for Paul Pogba? But he's got to earn that. And there's probably not the number of suitors for him that there were 2 or 3 years ago. There are better, younger players about.
Andy, for United to take that next step then, so that this time next year when they're going to Anfield, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer on the pre-match press conference isn't talking about it being a big upset if United were to go there and win. They do need more of those Bruno Fernandes type transformative figures. Is one of those positions that central midfield role then, that at the moment you have McTominay and Fred, it's hard to be critical of either of them because they both really stepped up this season, but it does still feel as though you almost have to have two men doing the job where one real exceptional player could do it, and the transformative effect that would have been everybody on Pogba have been able to play him in a slightly different role, that they need to get to a position where they don't have so much protection in front of the defence.
Yeah, the players you mentioned have been good. Is good enough to be great? Fernandinho was the best player in the semi-final against City a few weeks ago, and Ole Gunnar talks of the small margins. Well, we saw it in that game perfectly. Manchester City had the best defender in Ruben Diaz and Fernandinho. I think McTominay's improved physically and in terms of his confidence. I'm often in the stadiums and he's the most vocal player on the pitch. Not got the technical ability of Pogba or Fernandes. I think United fans hope that Donny van de Beek would be maybe that player that you're talking about, although he plays in a more advanced role. But right from the start, the information I was getting from the club was that he was brought in to bolster the squad because you need a big squad because of the intensity of the matches. And I made a point last week that players from Ajax tend to take time to settle. Matthijs de Ligt, when he went to Juventus, Frenkie de Jong, they took time to settle because they've been playing in this Ajax system for so long and conditioned in this one way of playing that when they're asked to play a different way and to do it in the Premier League's different to every other league physically. So Donny van de Beek will need time. Fred needed a lot of time, and maybe van de Beek will come much stronger next season, maybe even this season. He played against Watford last week. He did all right. Didn't watch him and think, wow, he's got to play himself into the starting 11 at Liverpool next week. And Fred and McTominay, I thought they were both pretty slack at the start of the game. They lost the ball too much, but then Fred's got all that energy and Scott has as well, and the pressing. And Fred did some lovely movements, but then I think it was he was done by Thiago. Just beautiful bit of skill, and he was probably the best Liverpool player in the first half. So I'm sounding a little bit reticent because I'm not describing Roy Keane and Paul Scholes here. And when you want to be winning leagues and Champions League, you need those top world-class players there.
Yeah.
McTominay's still young. He's got time to improve. He might become more. Darren Fletcher was a really important player for Manchester United.
And that might be the role McTominay ultimately fulfills, while somebody else ends up being in that Keane and Scholes role. I did just want to ask a question not related to Liverpool, Man United. I know you were watching Barcelona last night. Lionel Messi red carded for the very first time in his entire career.
Yes, he took a swung. It was a full-on swing in the 120th minute of the Spanish Super Cup final, played in an empty Olympic Stadium in Sevilla, and Barca were 3-2 down against Athletic Club, or Athletic Bilbao as they're known internationally. And we should talk more about them because they deserve credit, because they only take players from the Basque Country, which people obviously know. And they did a number on Barca. They were fantastic. And Messi lost his cool right at the end. It looked like Barca were going to win. They were 2-1 up in the 88th minute. They'd made the substitutions to see out the game. They brought on Pjanic. And then Athletic got an 88th minute equaliser, and 3 minutes later, Iñaki Williams scored a fantastic goal. Try and see it online somewhere, which beat Ter Stegen. And Athletic Club were one of the great powers of Spanish football. They were up there with Barca and Madrid for a long time in terms of the number of league titles that they won. But as football became more globalised, they lost their best players. Ander Herrera, for example, moved on. Kepa, the goalkeeper, moved on. So many Basque players have moved on because they're not Barca, Madrid, or one of the top clubs. Vicente Lizarazu played for Bayern Munich. But they still do an amazing job. The Basque Country's got 2.5 million people, so it's population size of Greater Manchester, maybe Greater Dublin. Someone will point out that Dublin's a little bit smaller than that. And to beat Barca was a huge achievement for them. You could see it in the delight of their players at the end. They were all singing. And for the Basque Country in general, in the Basque cultural area, there are 5 top-flight teams. It's amazing. Real Sociedad, who Manchester United play next month, doing really well. They were narrowly beaten on penalties by Barca in the semi-final. Eibar, a team from a town of 27,000 people in La Liga, and solid there. Alaves and Pamplona, who play in Navarra, but would definitely consider themselves Basque. It's a real football hotbed and always has been.
Andy, good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning. Cheers.
Thank you.
Andy Mitten giving us some thoughts there on Liverpool Man United and a bit of background to what happened to Leo Messi last night. We're going to talk NFL in just a moment, but yesterday afternoon, Paul Rouse and Dave McIntyre was with Joe on our Sunday paper review. The podcast is available right now. Here they are talking about the latest melodrama in Irish football.
I think there's a little bit of a schism in Irish football journalism over the whole Stephen Kenny situation and the developments that have, presented themselves in the last week or two. And some are a little bit angry, I feel, in the way that Stephen Kenny's been treated. Some can't quite understand where the negativity is coming from outside of the results, obviously, which have not been good. But the off-the-field stuff, Eamon Sweeney's certainly in that camp. The headline in his piece is "The Knives Are Out for Kenny." His implication is that there are people within the FAI who never really accepted Stephen Kenny as being the right man to take over the reins for Mick McCarthy, and they're unwilling to let go of the prejudices they held on to before Stephen Kenny's first game in charge. And the sooner he's gone, the better for them. I don't know who these people are. I can't imagine that people within the FAI who hold such opinions are still in a position of influence. And if that is the case, how much have we learned? How much have they learned over what's gone on in the John Delaney era and then the weeks and months and years since John Delaney stepped down from his role? The Damien Duff situation is an interesting one. There seems to have been a few reasons peddled in the last week for his departure. The one that seems to be getting most traction is that he was unhappy with the FAI's reaction to the use of that motivational video in that season, or that friendly against England, and that was the main reason he's chosen to leave. Now, I can't buy that. Damien Duff is a headstrong individual. He's always been his own man. He's always made his own decisions. But to turn his back on Stephen Kenny, the players who he apparently really enjoyed working with, and the rest of the backroom team, because he was annoyed at those in the FAI and their reaction to the video, I don't know who's peddling that reason. Damien Duff has not come out with a reason himself, and unfortunately, in the absence of such a reason from the man himself, that leads to a vacuum of information and idle speculation. That's what this reason could be.
All right, more from the pay-per-view available on our podcast network. Just subscribe to the Sunday pay-per-view and you'll get it in the OTB highlights section as well. It's 8:37 this morning, time for us to turn our attention to the NFL. I'm delighted to say Mike Carlson is with us. Mike, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning. Not quite so bleary-eyed as I was last week, because I managed to make myself go to bed at halftime of the Saints-Bucks game, even though it was tied, but got up early to catch up with it. Good weekend of football, though. In the end, Tom Brady won, so that was the storyline from that. We'll come back to that in a minute. The other big storyline that we have to talk about is that Patrick Mahomes' Kansas City Chiefs saw off the Cleveland Browns. It was a much closer game in the end because Patrick Mahomes went off injured with a concussion. And this could end up being the most important moment of the entire season. Yeah, it really could. And in fairness, it was still a close game when Mahomes went off. You know, he was very, very effective in the first half, or up to about the last 5 minutes of the first half. But in the second half, they weren't having their way with Cleveland, and Cleveland were back in the game. And it took some last-minute heroics by Chad Henne after he threw an interception to win the game for them. But if Mahomes is gone, obviously that changes both the nature of the matchup with the Chiefs next week for the Bills. And the Bills, had a pretty good game against Baltimore. But it also takes away the big selling point, which would be next weekend, would be two old quarterbacks matched up against each other and two of the young quarterbacks matched up against each other. And nobody really wants to see, I think, Chad Henne at quarterback for the Chiefs. The Chiefs are a better team than that. Henne quarterbacked in Week 17, but remember they rested Jason Kelsey, Tyreek Hill, their offensive stars as well. So he's not as bad as people think, but that's not the matchup that anybody wants. No, so let's just talk a little bit about that game and about Andy Reid's peculiar type of genius. So we've talked a good bit about Andy Reid over the last number of years and how the Super Bowl has kind of elevated all of his previous work to a point where he's now considered one of the all-time great coaches because of his innovations. So he's the coach of the Kansas City Chiefs. It's at the very end of the game, they need one more first down to burn the clock and kill the final 2 minutes. And they decide to go for it on 4th and 1, or how did that whole thing come about? Because that seems to be
Tony Romo in the commentary box was like, they're not going to do a real play here. They're going to punt this.
Yeah, it was kind of Tony Romo at his worst, where he was getting the most excited and making predictions that didn't come true. Andy Reid outfoxed him as well as everybody else. They were on a 3rd and long. It was I think it was 3rd and 14, and Henne was under a lot of pressure. They were coming at him hard, but he scrambled away and he dove for the first down, and it looked like he had made it. Tony Romo was going crazy. This was his Havlicek stole the ball moment. But it turned out when you looked at it on replay that as he was diving, his elbow and forearm had hit the ground, so the ball was marked back short of the first down. So now you had a 4th and short, and Andy decided to go for it. Field. So if he doesn't make it, he's handing the Browns a good shot at coming up with a score that would win the game, because they were only up by 5. And they line up in a shotgun formation, which surprised everybody, because everyone was figuring, well, it's Chad Henne with a quarterback sneak or something like that. And then Romo decides that what they're doing is trying to draw Cleveland offside, which is something that teams were doing a lot in this playoff weekend, but doesn't work as often as probably not often enough to justify wasting the time out on it. But instead, he runs just a quick out to Tyreek Hill. They roll out. Tyreek Hill gets off the line very quickly. Nobody can catch up to him. They get him the ball very smartly. He stays in bounds, and they run out the clock. It was a brilliant piece of play calling that nobody was really expecting. But it's one of those things where, if you want the old football adages, you go to your best players when you need the yardage, and his best players are Tyreek Hill and Jason Kelce at this point. So put the ball in their hands, let them do it. And I just loved that. I mean, I think I tweeted at the time, how do you not love Andy Reid at this point? He's kind of like the big Santa Claus of the NFL.
So we obviously don't know yet how bad the concussion that Mahomes suffered is, but he also had a toe injury. So if he does make it back next week, it's not going to be at full tilt, is it?
Well, I don't know. The toe did seem to be bothering him, and it's without knowing what it is, you don't know whether it was just a bruise. If it's turf toe or something, he could really be bothered. I don't think that would keep him out. The concussion's another story, and it's basically out of the Chiefs' hands. It's up to the doctors. He really was punchy when he got up. By the time he ran into the locker room, he looked relatively normal, but obviously he failed the concussion protocol. Most of the time, a week is enough time for guys to come back. But your guess is probably as good as mine, as there'll be a lot of pressure, obviously. He'll want to come back, which is always the worst thing in terms of pressure on him. But I'd kind of be surprised if he doesn't play. Not shocked, but surprised.
Okay, so they're going to be up against the Bills next week, and the Bills did a very good job of shutting down Lamar Jackson, who is the last season's MVP and who looked like he was getting back to that level of form. How did they manage to do that?
Yeah, it was kind of like last year with the Titans, or it's kind of like what the Titans did, what the Bills did to the Ravens did to the Titans the week before. They tried to shut down the Baltimore running game and make Lamar Jackson beat them passing and from the pocket. They did a really good job of containing him in the pocket so that his running wasn't a factor the way it was the week before against the Titans, and they played a zone that wasn't going to let the receivers get by, whereas the Ravens had played man-to-man against the Titans receivers. But, it exposed the lack of receivers and the lack of outside throwing by Jackson. And, people were now calling, for a rethink of that Ravens offense. Strangely enough, the Ravens dominated the game offensively, time of possession, yardage, things like that, but they were never able to move the ball consistently. And really, the big play of that game was the pick six, the 101 yards by by Taron Johnson, which changed the game completely. And, it was by no means, Buffalo couldn't run the ball at all. So it's going to, Josh Allen's going to have his work cut out for him next week, regardless of who plays quarterback for Kansas City, because Kansas City's largest weakness, as we saw against the Browns, is their run defense, not their pass defense, but their run defense. And the Bills are very, very dependent on the pass.
Kansas City 3-point favourites at the moment for that game. I think that's pricing in an uncertainty about whether or not Patrick Mahomes is going to play. In the other one, it is the two best quarterbacks of their generation, and it seems odd to say that Aaron Rodgers is on the same kind of level as Tom Brady, despite the fact that he has 5 rings less than him. And yet, the way Aaron Rodgers is playing at the moment is as well as any quarterback has ever played.
Yeah, and let's not get confused. Tom Brady didn't really win that game for the Bucs. The Bucs defense won that game for the Bucs, and they made plays where the Saints defense didn't. The Saints dropped a couple of interceptions that could have changed the tenor of the game. The Bucs hung on to theirs. They picked up a great fumble recovery. They gave Brady short fields in that game. Rodgers, the Packers were never really in danger in that game against the Rams, but it looked like a couple of times the Rams were going to be able to get back in it. And remember, the Rams are a very, very good defensive team, although Aaron Donald was playing injured, and that was pretty obvious in that game. Rodgers has been phenomenal for most of the season, incredibly accurate. I keep saying this, and I'll say it another time, and I've said it actually for a couple of years. When everyone went crazy for that Patrick Mahomes no-look pass a couple of years ago, I said right then that Aaron Rodgers was Patrick Mahomes before Patrick Mahomes was Patrick Mahomes. He does all the same things. He can throw no-look passes. He throws on the run. He threw a beautiful touchdown pass off his back foot. He right now is playing as well as he has played. Green Bay's offense was pretty good all around. They can run the ball. They used 3 backs. They all ran well against the Rams. So it's going to be a really interesting matchup for them. They tend to look like they're playing a guessing game on defense, where they rely on pass rush, and it's kind of like guessing whether or not they're going to do that. But Tom Brady's shown in the last few weeks, that the old scheme of rushing Brady is the way to disrupt him hasn't really worked. Washington couldn't do it, and they have a really strong front, and really, unless you can come right in his face up the middle and stop him from stepping forward in the pocket, he loves pass rush. If you use more than 4 guys to generate it, he's going to find the open man somewhere. So, I think this is a great weekend coming up, because you have the matchup of these 2 old quarterbacks who are both Hall of Famers for sure, and then you have the matchup, if Mahomes plays, of Mahomes against Josh Allen, 2 young quarterbacks. It's taken Allen a couple of years to get to where he is, but right now, you've got probably the 4 best quarterbacks in the league right now in terms of how they're playing. It was sad watching Drew Brees, not being able to win that game, but he lost a lot of weapons, including Deontay Harris on the first kickoff return of the game, which was awful for them. Taysom Hill and Latavius Murray weren't there, so Kamara had to handle almost everything for them, and they really couldn't do it. It was weird that their big play of the game was that touchdown pass from Jameis Winston, who last year was the Bucs quarterback, on a trick play that the Bears had run against New Orleans last week. And Davon Wims dropped the touchdown pass that would have made that Bears-New Orleans game a lot closer. But like I say, it was the Bucs defense that got them where they were. It was a tremendous defensive game. They stopped Mike Evans from even catching a ball. He could have had a touchdown early in the game, but he was just out of bounds on that. He got beaten by Sean Murphy Bunting for an interception that was almost a pick 6, and you have to give a lot of credit to the Bucs for being able to run the ball. Leonard Fournette looking like he did when he was a rookie in Jacksonville.
Right. Very remarkable. I did want to just ask one quick question in the context of something else that's going on. An amazing piece in Sports Illustrated about the dysfunction in Houston. And if you think about the career that Aaron Rodgers has had in Green Bay, which a decade of which where he was as good as Patrick Mahomes is effectively wasted because the head coach is a numpty. Deshaun Watson is now sitting in a scenario where the entire organization is dysfunctional, and it's the biggest non-story so far that he may yet ask for a trade. He's on the verge of it. He hasn't quite pressed the button. He's waiting to see who the new head coach is going to be. But coaching really matters in the NFL in a way that in other sports, in soccer, for example, you can be top scorer, you can have a great career. Eventually, they'll sack the coach and somebody new will come in. In the NFL, you can be landed with really bad coaching and it can ruin your career.
Absolutely. It's so important, and I think players often don't realize it enough. It's so important to go to a system and a situation that suits you, that's tailor-made for you. That's what Brady did, obviously, made the right choice going to Tampa Bay, and that's not speaking in hindsight, said that at the beginning of the season. Watson, Bill O'Brien was supposed to be a quarterback whisperer, based on his coaching Tom Brady, which we know it doesn't take I could be Tom Brady's quarterback coach. I think getting along with him is probably the biggest thing. And, Watson, after his injury, was a different quarterback, and they never quite were able to figure out exactly how to make him work best. Trading DeAndre Hopkins last year didn't help. And they fired O'Brien, and now it's a cesspool there. It's a real mess. The guy who's running the team is Jack Easterby, came from the Patriots. He was basically a chaplain, a morale coach, whatever that means. And it seems like he's been intriguing his way into control of this team. It's going to be very difficult, I think, to persuade a coach to go there. They have no salary cap room. They've got a lot of overpaid veterans, especially on the defense. They don't have many offensive weapons. They don't have draft picks because O'Brien traded most of those away. So it's a bad situation, and Watson's clearly unhappy with it. The only solution for the Texans, I think, is to probably do what Watson wanted to do in the first place, where all this kind of controversy started, saying they should hire Eric Bieniemy, the Chiefs' offensive coordinator, as a coach. And Bieniemy never gets enough respect when the coaching carousel comes around. I don't know what will happen, and he might be due his chance, and it might be that he perceives that going to Houston might be the only chance he gets if Houston offer him the job. And it'll be a question of how much control he's going to have over what happens personnel-wise, but also the chance to work with Watson might be an attractive one there, even though, as I said, they don't really have any weapons for him. It really needs a whole makeover. And whether Bieniemy, who I think is a fine coach, and I think will probably be a good head coach, whether he's a guy to supervise a makeover, I don't know. Jack Easterby certainly isn't. So it would depend a lot on who they hire as a general manager and how much power that general manager has underneath Easterby and probably the team ownership. But it is a snake pit down there, which I don't think a lot of coaches are going to want to go down to. But, if it's your only chance and you're at an age where you might not get another one, it would be a good one. And I think Bieniemy deserves his chance as a head coach.
Mike, good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks, mate.
Mike Carlson giving us some thoughts there on the various situations unfolding. It will be interesting to see if Nick Caserio and Bieniemy end up as a dynamic duo. Who knows? Maybe marriages arranged like that can sometimes work in sport. 53 minutes past 8 this morning. 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number. If you'd like to get involved in the conversation, you can always leave a comment on the YouTube channel as well. We've got our very latest in our Irish Rugby Depth Chart series coming up on OTB AM after 9 o'clock with Alan Quinlan. Right now, though, it's time for the Gillette Pressure Rankings.
You put them under pressure. For me, it was a self-imposed pressure.
Was I under pressure? No.
Yeah, they're under pressure. Everyone's under pressure.
OTB AM's Pressure Rankings with Gillette.
And the big pressure.
The government are going to make working from home a right, apparently. That was one of the headlines from the weekend. They need to fix the broadband, though. Nathan, you're under a bit of pressure this morning yourself.
It wasn't a broadband issue. So I think at the moment we have 4 laptops in the house. So I was having a Skype issue, which I think is a bug from downloading the latest Skype. And I switched on 3 laptops to try and fix it, and all of them went into that Microsoft update at the same time.
The update from hell.
So, yeah, the joys of homeschooling and having 25 devices in the house at the one time.
Homeschooling is not as much crack as the bureau or the brochure says.
Well, in one way, I guess I'm fortunate that I'm married to a teacher, so all these little things that are quite difficult for a lot of people, seesaw and the likes, it's just does that no problem. She's down with all that sort of stuff, so it makes it very straightforward, and I don't need to stress about it at all.
You're abdicating all responsibility and outsourcing it, is what I'm hearing.
No, absolutely. Well, maybe a little bit.
Right, today the pressure rankings are Liverpool focused. We're going to name the 5 Liverpool players who are under the most pressure. Who is number 5, and take it from there.
So at number 5, Ger, we have Sadio Mane, who has gone under the radar somewhat this season because all the criticism ends up finding its way towards Mo Salah. But Mo Salah is the Premier League's top scorer, and Sadio Mane has just 6 Premier League goals so far this season. Yesterday, again, he was rarely involved in the game, a couple of lively bursts. Yes, he has a nice, cheery face. It's very hard to be critical. Yes, he works hard, but at some stage, he's going to have to start contributing again down the other end of the pitch. And also, it'd be nice if himself and Mo Salah just sort of kissed the mate up. Maybe not literally in these COVID times, and maybe didn't hug it out when they celebrate a goal, but it does seem as though their relationship isn't what it needs to be. So I think eventually, as the criticism moves through the Liverpool team, if they don't turn it round, there's going to be a bit of a focus on Mane, because I think so far this season, he's got a free pass, despite not being up to where he was over the last couple of years.
They're just this generation's Shearer and Cole, right? Sheringham and Cole.
Sheringham and Cole.
Yeah.
Quite possibly. I don't know if it's quite at that extreme a level. I guess we won't find out till they both moved on from the club and retired, and we hear they never spoke to each other for 4 years, and he wouldn't pass to him and he wouldn't pass to him. But there doesn't seem to be any real partnership or joy ever between the two of them. It's rare. I'm sure someone's going to send in a photo. It seems rare that you see the two of them genuinely celebrate together, which isn't ideal for your 2 main attacking talents.
You've got Thiago at number 4. A lot of people are going to be very surprised at this. How could there possibly be pressure on him? Nathan, anybody who listened to your commentary yesterday, you were loving Thiago. I was like, why don't you just marry Thiago, Nathan? I mean, halfway through.
Is there anything about this man that just isn't beautiful? Everything about him. How he handles himself, how he looks, and how he controls the football and passes it around the pitch. But that is bringing its own pressure, particularly with the position Liverpool are in right now, Ger, because he sort of needs to be a combination of Xavi, Iniesta, Graham Souness, Steven Gerrard, all combined for Liverpool between now and the end of the season, particularly if Fabinho and Jordan Henderson continue at centre-back. He couldn't have done much more in his first few games. Almost scored yesterday as well, Liverpool's best chance of the game. I do feel he needs to do everything probably 10, 15 yards further forward for Liverpool to really keep teams absolutely pegged back. But his range of passing it's just everything about him oozes quality. So I think the pressure is that if Liverpool are to retain this title, he needs to maintain that standard between now and the end of the season. And he has struggled consistently over the years to stay fit and get a run of games together. So Liverpool need that because they haven't seen enough of him so far.
You would expect him to get better as the betting in process finishes. I mean, obviously he's been there a while, but there's been many false starts for him in his Liverpool career up to this point. You would expect him to get better with any kind of run of games. Let's assume fitness for a while.
Yeah, I think he will get better, but I think he's almost there already. Like, that is what Liverpool bought by signing somebody established who's won it all, who's played at a very similar type team to Liverpool, who play a very similar style of football and how high up the pitch they like to press, and understands the type of control that Liverpool need in the middle of the pitch. So I think he's almost there. It would be if he could get into a midfield with Henderson and Wijnaldum either side of him, and they're doing all the running and they're providing that energy. And as David Meyler said, Henderson's providing that cover for Alexander-Arnold, and it can all click into gear. Because I think Fabinho centre-back and Thiago in the middle of midfield works just fine. But they need Henderson back in alongside him.
All right, who's next?
Roberto Firmino, who I think the pressure is really going to come on for his place in the team once Diogo Jota is fit once again. Roberto Firmino, a lot of people felt, was one of the first names on the team sheet for the last couple of years under Jurgen Klopp, despite the fact he's never scored goals at the level of Sadio Mane and Mo Salah. He's still not scoring the goals, and now it doesn't feel as though he's contributing in those other ways either. The amount of attacks that broke down from him yesterday, he looks a little bit short in confidence. Again, maybe he's that little bit fatigued, but he is the central figure of those three, and nothing at all is happening for him right now. And he looks most at risk for Liverpool if they were to decide to change their system over the coming weeks and maybe just go with the two up top, but also once Jota comes back. you've got to think that Firmino is the one that he's most likely to step in for.
I think there's a case that he's the most number one under pressure at the moment, but he's not in your list. Trent is number 2, and the heat is on Trent Alexander-Arnold, a number of different things. He obviously wants to play for England this summer, and I'd say probably wants to pick up a few trophies in the meantime, but all of a sudden, from being like world-class right back, people are going, hang on, what happened to him?
Well, he set the bar very, very high for himself at a very young age. And I think he was the best attacking right back in world football. There's no question about that. He's always been susceptible defensively, but I don't think Jurgen Klopp ever lost a night's sleep about it because of what he contributed going forward. I think he's been most affected by the changes at the back in several ways. We touched on Van Dijk and Van Dijk's ability for those crossfield balls, which released Trent Alexander-Arnold. Also the fact that he doesn't have an established centre-half alongside him covering, that when he makes those runs forward, that he probably looks as though he's lacking a little bit of confidence there. And Jordan Henderson not stepping in whenever he bombs forward, and he camped inside the opposition half the vast majority of the time. So all those safety nets, I guess, that were there for him, that allowed him to get forward, aren't there anymore. And he just looks a little bit shot in terms of confidence. He, against Southampton, gave the ball away more than any player had in the Premier League this season, which is a shocking stat in one way, until you see, actually, I think last season, only one other player had given the ball away more than him. That is the type of game he plays. Yeah. It's risky passes. It's a risk and reward game that Liverpool want him to play. But when he's at the peak of his powers, it contributes hugely to Liverpool in an attacking sense. And as much as the focus is on the front three, Liverpool, attack-wise last season, so much of it came through the 2 fullbacks and what they contributed. It's still coming on the other side, you feel, from Andy Robertson. It's not there at the moment from Alexander-Arnold. He's still very young. You're going to back him every day of the week to come back from this. And when they get a regular centre-half alongside him, he'll be just fine. But his decline seems sort of emblematic of what the problem at Liverpool is at the moment.
Mo Salah is your number 1.
Yeah, Mo Salah is the number 1 because he is Liverpool's star man. He is the player who's been linked with Real Madrid, and he's the one they constantly expect to deliver. He's the one who provides that X factor. I still think he is very harshly treated at times, even yesterday, where a lot of the focus has come on Mo Salah, when he did more than Firmino and Mane in that game. He constantly makes himself available, even when things aren't going his way. He's constantly looking to get on the ball, trying to make something happen, but nothing is happening for him right now. He is still the Premier League's top scorer, but when you are in a crisis like this, when you are in a massive dip and you need someone to drag you out of it, that's where your main man has to step up, and that is what Mo Salah is for Liverpool. So he needs to find something very, very quickly. He needs to find it over the next couple of games against Burnley and Tottenham, or this title race is going to go away from Liverpool. He's shown he can do it before. His goal-scoring record is a match for anybody in the Premier League over the last 2 or 3 seasons. But now is the time to show that his head hasn't been turned, that there isn't something going on off the pitch, and show why he should get that 300 grand a week contract from Liverpool that he feels he deserves, and that I feel he deserves as well, because I think he's the best player in the Premier League. He's just got to start showing it again. Why is James Milner not the emergency centre-back? But presumably he doesn't have the pace, would be the concern. I haven't seen the sprints between Henderson and Milner. Yeah. He's got 4 or 5 years on Jordan Henderson at this stage. He could play him. He's probably more the emergency right back or left back, I think, for Liverpool rather than
stick him in. And let's stop the whining about the midfield. Let's have Henderson play midfield.
Physically, Henderson is stronger. So it's needs must at the moment for Liverpool. But I go back to it. I think taking Henderson out of midfield detracts from Liverpool in a whole host of ways. Yeah. So stick him back in midfield. Stick Milner in centre back. I think Milner would have been a great centre back if he'd gone there a decade ago. It could have had the potential to be a world class centre back. A Mascherano style, except actually physically stronger. I think if there was a fight, by the way, James Milner would kill Henderson. So physically stronger, I'm not having that. But that's this week's pressure rankings.
OTB AM's pressure rankings with Gillette.
Right, it is 3 minutes past 9. You're watching OTB AM. If you've missed anything this morning, just subscribe to the podcast. You can get it there. It's free. We'll have it nestling in your podcast player within 20 minutes at the end of the show. Wherever you listen to yours, the best place to get it these days, of course, is the OTB Sports app. We've already heard from David Meyler talking about Liverpool, Andy Mitten talking about Manchester United, and Mike Carlson talking about the NFL. Alan Quinlan is going to join us straight after these.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
Looking for a football show with a bit of a twist?
Ferguson has a knack for seeing maverick and, kind of creative genius and sort of letting it flow.
Team 33, the football magazine show for the football purists. The very best interviews with the cult heroes of the past and a look at the cultural side of football. Team 33, live at 9 p.m. every Friday on OTB Sports Radio. Live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
So we're doing our depth chart at the moment ahead of the Six Nations. We hope it's all going to go ahead as planned. I'm delighted to say Alan Quinlan is with us to look at the back row. Alan, good morning to you. How are you?
Morning, lads. How are you? Good, thanks.
The back row has traditionally been an area of strength for Ireland, and it's no different at the moment. We seem to be producing good young back rowers at a rate that, if only we could have 9s and 10s like this, would be great. But it does seem super competitive, and yet you can see a Six Nations evolving where actually it looks like a very, very familiar back row.
Yeah, it does look like a familiar back row. I think the back row that finished against Scotland, Stander at 6, Doris at 8 and O'Mahony at 7 is probably the back row that you'd pick now. O'Mahony obviously has found a fair bit of form for Munster and for Ireland in November, so he wasn't on the team for the start of the Six Nations last year, but he's worked his way back and put himself as a starter, as a number 7. Ahead of Van der Fleer, Connors, Dan Levy, guys like that. Jordy Murphy and Ulster. I don't have him in the list, but he's still a top quality player as well. So there's loads of depth there, Jerry. Yeah, there's lots of players, but just, I suppose, for 12 to 18 months, the balance didn't seem right in the back row with, the back row that was your traditional back row of Stander at 8, Mahoney at 6, and either Levy or Van der Fleer at 7. And so there's a lot of depth there, and there's a lot of options for Andy Farrell, but it looks like he'll go with, for that opening game against Wales. So for me, I think he'll go with Stander, Doris and O'Mahony.
O'Mahony at 7, was he a 7 as a kid? Was he a 7 coming up at any point?
He's played there, but I don't think he's an out-and-out 7. He's, I think... The way the game has gone, I think lots of teams have moved 6s to 7s, and it's about getting the personality in the field and making room for them. I played 7 a good few times for Munster over the years when David Wallace was injured or out. So it can be done pretty easily. I think your more natural 7s, obviously, they're more familiar to that role, and they're probably quicker and around the field more and a little bit more agile, if you like. And so O'Mahony has played there, and he's played a couple of times for Munster over the years, but he's not a natural 7.
Was it the Lions really who put this in everybody's head is kind of what I'm asking, really?
Yeah, he of course, yeah. I think with Warburton and himself both playing and trying to put 2 of them in the team, and Australia did it for years with Pocock, and they moved him around. He was more of a natural 7. I think you see 7s moving across more often. Sometimes, if a team plays well and a 6 is moved over to 7, it's a great move. If it doesn't work out and you don't have the natural flow in your game, people start to question that. So it's something he's done pretty well. I think he offers a lot of breakdown ability, and then the extra line-out ability as well it can be a plus. But it's kind of horses for courses. Will Connors kind of jumped ahead of the queue for that England game in November as a number 7, and he'd been playing so well for Leinster. Van der Fleer is an ever-present for the last couple of seasons, has an unbelievable engine on him. So I just think O'Mahony brings probably a little bit more physicality and aggression there, and presence and leadership and stuff like that. And that's why he's facilitated there at the moment.
He's kind of undroppable the way the form that he's in at the moment. There's been an explosion in his form in really since the return after lockdown, and so you have to have him in your team. Let's go 6, 7, 8. So let's start with 6. CJ Stander is the man at the moment, and it seems as if it wouldn't be CJ Stander, it'd be Caelan Doris. So 6 and 8 kind of seem quite interchangeable at the moment. In terms of the depth chart, who is behind those guys?
Yeah, they're all interchangeable. I think there's out of probably 15 names that I could give. I've only given 12 for those three positions across the back row, because obviously if Stander doesn't play at 6 and was injured, there's every chance that O'Mahony will move over 6 and Van der Fleers, Connors or Levy will go 7. So there's a bit of chopping and changing, and the same applies to number 8. If Doris doesn't play, they'll move Stander in number 8. So it's not a case of they're all pigeonholed into one position, and that's what can happen in the back row. So behind Stander, I would say the next 6 would be O'Mahony. For me, Rhys Ruddock has been brilliant for Leinster and ever dependable. He's a fantastic player and probably doesn't get the credit, probably have the flamboyance or the line-breaking ability that some of them have, but unbelievable work rate, relentless in everything he does, and I think he would be my next 6. Then I'd have Max Deegan in that line as well, which he's kind of gone off the radar a little bit.
His knee injury really, I suppose, is taking him out of...
Yeah, it hasn't helped him, it has taken him out of the scene, and sometimes when you're out injured and there's plenty of other back rows available, which Leinster have had, you kind of forget some of these guys. Jack Conan's the same, so I would say Max Deegan easily could play at number 6 for Ireland and has that ability to do a brilliant job. And then kind of an up-and-coming one is Gavin Coombs this year. He's played really well with Munster. He's 110 kilos, 6'4" or 5", big physical presence. And if he can add more to his game, he could, come into the reckoning. So any of these guys could jump up the line if they had a big game. Depends who's selected between Munster and Leinster next week. You can change the prerogative. Or if Ireland lose a game or two and there's changes made to the back row. So they're my 5, 4 plus 1, if you like, for blindside at the moment.
Rhys Ruddock must feel like it's now or never if he's going to get back in the squad. If he doesn't get picked after the form that he's shown over the last period of time, then he's banging his head against a brick wall.
Yeah, he is, I think, but it's strange. You put a list of players there, and one good game can change the rankings there and move you right up the list. So Ruddock has played really well, but unfortunately he's kind of pigeonholed in this group below the probably the 4 guys that have been involved in match day. If he plays next week against Munster and plays really well, and the back row struggle against Wales, he's someone who could propel himself forward and get a start. So yeah, it is. He's got to keep plugging away, and it can change very, very quickly, Jerry. with injuries and form and all that kind of stuff. But you would kind of say that if he keeps the form going and doesn't get selected, well, it could be an opportunity or a chance missed from him.
Alan, if we take it that James Ryan is nailed on in the second row, and then it's one of Tadhg Beirne or Ian Henderson, could you possibly play the one who doesn't start in the second row at 6 of Beirne and Henderson?
Yeah, you could. If you play England or South Africa, or you're looking to have more physicality in your team, you could do that. Lots of those second rows can play in the back row. Tadhg Beirne or Ian Henderson, even someone like Ryan Baird, if you wanted to get his athleticism into the team, you could look at putting him in the back row. I think his footwork and pace is exceptional as well. So that's something that could happen. Tadhg Beirne has played a couple of times there, and he's familiar with the back row. He's probably very comfortable to play in the back row as well. So yeah, of course that could happen, and it's down to horses for courses and physicality and all that kind of stuff if you want to add that. But I think Quinn Roos played really well in the second row as well, so he may still be very, very close to getting the team. And Henderson's knee has caused him problems. But it'd be great for a coach. If I was coaching a team and you had options like putting a Byrne or a Ryan Baird in the back row, or even moving Henderson back there, bringing him off the bench even would be a great option to have.
How much is it down to how confident you feel in your own position? If Andy Farrell thinks he's going to get to see the whole time out between now and the World Cup, does he think, well, I'm going to give Ryan Baird 5 games now and accelerate that process of getting him into the team because I know that he is somebody I want on my team in the World Cup? Whereas actually, I suppose, everybody in Irish rugby feels the urge to win now and, mortgage the future.
Well, they're at more of a juncture now, Ger, of those kind of conversations and debates happening and that kind of pressure coming from fans and media. If Ireland were to have a disappointing Six Nations, those questions will keep coming up. Can you keep picking the same familiar faces? I think that pressure is ramping up on Andy Farrell. And so he doesn't necessarily have to play him now. I think Ryan Baird is not going to lose any sort of momentum or flow by not getting selected now. He needs to play regularly with Leinster and be a dominant figure at provincial level and European level with Leinster and be a starter for Leinster to really ramp up that pressure. He has that potential and that ability to take it to the next level. But I don't, there is a pressure in the Six Nations, particularly they're like cup games. You've got to win them, and summer tours and stuff like that. You can maneuver around a little bit in November internationals, but he doesn't necessarily have to pick him now. But particularly, the point I'm trying to make is there's added pressure in every performance and more scrutiny now going forward because of the run Ireland have had in the last 2 years. That, maybe before if you had a bad game that you'd get away with it and that you get back on track and Ireland would get back on track themselves. But because of the results, and I think that pressure is added. So, and then you look at the depth of a lot of those loose forwards, second rows and back rows that in an ideal world, you want to kind of settle on young players that are going to be at the World Cup. But there is a need to win matches as well. So
it's double-edged, right?
It is double-edged.
Well, you don't want to introduce Ryan Baird to a losing culture. You want him to come into a winning culture and have to fight for stuff so that, and I'm just using him as an example, but it's the same for any young player. You can't just waltz into the team, even though the fans really want to see you because that's really exciting. If you're not going to be in a team that's going to be winning type matches, then you become part of a losing culture and that becomes self-fulfilling.
Yeah, and it's, look, as I said, the pressure, there's pressure on Andy Farrell now in every game and more scrutiny. So if Ryan Baird plays more games and really stands out and is banging at the door for selection, I think he'll have to get it at this stage. So Caelan Doris came into the team last year when they were in a kind of tough period, a tough moment, and he's now seen as a very important player for Ireland. So you don't want to make multiple changes for the sake of it. These guys will train and be exposed to that environment throughout the Six Nations. And if they're good enough, hopefully they'll get selected.
We should look at number 7, the graphic for that one as well. And so obviously we've said Peter O'Mahony is the man in possession here. Who's after Peter O'Mahony in the 7th depth chart?
Yeah, it's hard to put him in order here, to be honest, as regards to 2, 3 and 4. And I'd like to make that point that it's very difficult in all 4 positions to put him in order. I think maybe the number 8 position is the one that the top 2 are kind of a good bit ahead of the others. But Peter O'Mahony at 7, he probably has the jersey and will get the jersey now going forward for a while. But then you have Van der Fleers, Connors and Levy. How can you separate any 3 of those, I think Levy's still working his way back, and it does take a long, long time when you're out for that period of time to really get that fitness level up and that intensity and that hardness in the body again. So I suppose Van der Fleers and Connors are neck and neck in number 2, and then Dan Levy is next in line, and Scott Penny is the one that there's been a lot of talk about in the last 18 months, 2 years, and his ability as well. So he's probably the up and coming one who, again, if he gets more opportunities and when you start putting these names down, Jerry, you think, how are all these guys going to stay at Leinster if they want to play for Ireland? And look, I know it's another conundrum that Leo Cullen will find himself in, and I'm sure there's more guys coming up behind him as well. But they're the four there, plus Scott Penny.
And at number 8, we've got Caelan Doris at the top.
Yeah, Doris at the top, because I think he's made that jersey his own now. So talented, has a bit of everything in his game, and it's top quality throughout. I think he's probably going to get a bit physically more imposing, which is something maybe he needs to do. He's still very young. I'm sure he'll be a far more confident player putting on the Ireland jersey this season again. But if he got injured, I think they wouldn't leave Stander at 6 and bring in Jack Conner and Max Deegan at 8. I don't think so. I think they'd move Stander back to 8 and look to put someone at 6. So it's Doris, Stander next, Jack Conner, who, you know, I'm a fan of. I think he's a brilliant player. He's been very unlucky with injury as well, and he hasn't kicked on consistently to that next level. I think he has the ability to do that. And then Max Deegan, again, a very exciting young player as well, who got capped last year. And the up and coming one is Paul Boyle. I picked from Connacht. I think he's done really, really well and become a real leader in that Connacht team. And you could add Owen Masterson in there as well, who's you know, a very, very talented player, a little bit older, but they're the 5 for number 8 as well.
So Gavin Coombs, Scott Penny and Paul Boyle are your next gens. Tell us about Coombs.
Well, he's done really well for Munster, hasn't he? And I think Johan van Graan backing him to play in European games, you know, standing out in Pro 14 games and is one thing, but getting the backing then of your coach to start in Europe, that's a real statement, and it's a statement of confidence for the player as well, that they're now in the mix with the big boys and playing these European games, and it's not down to injuries or the coach's hand hasn't been forced. What I love about him is his ability to get tries. Some of them are very close to the line, but he just seems to turn up in the right areas. He's powerful, he's quick, he's agile, and he's grown in confidence. He's a big, imposing physical specimen. I'd love to see him be a bit more aggressive and physical, but that'll probably come. You know, even watching the Clermont game in France, he made a bad mistake early on. He got handed off by Yato, and they scored the first try. A lot of guys would have dropped their head there. I think of myself in that position. You could have dropped his head easily, and he didn't. He bounced back and was prominent throughout that game. And he's a brilliant player. He's someone who, you know, if he stands out next weekend, he could jump up the ladder a little bit and be in a position to step into the back row like like Caelan Doris. And then, you know, if you two guys like that in the Irish back row, building towards the next World Cup, well, then you've a change in the guard, haven't you? And, and he's certainly one who can jump in there.
If you're a head coach, like, who, you know, likelihood is going to have the same 9 and 10 that we've had for the best part of the last decade, are you looking at various parts of your team saying, look, we're building slowly, the building blocks are in place, like, you know, just to try and change that mood music around him and the coaching ticket a bit?
Yeah, for sure. And Craig Casey is someone who I know we're not doing the halfbacks, but he's someone who's trained with Ireland in November, and he certainly could be in the mix come the next World Cup as well, and probably should be if he continues to improve. Hopefully Carberry will come back. There's a bit more depth in the fly half position as well, so some of those players may come through as well. But if the opportunity is there to pick a younger player, if they're good enough and they bring enthusiasm and energy and you can move away a little bit. I always hate the idea of discarding guys for the sake of it, older players, because of their age profile. If they're playing well enough, of course they should, you know, you've got to give them the opportunity and the chance to deliver as well. But if you've young guys who can bring something different, more athleticism, more enthusiasm, more footballing ability, something that we're kind of crying out for in Ireland, well, then Andy Farrell is going to have to try and seriously look at that and give him the opportunity. It's very rare in Ireland, Gerard, you have 19, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds who are ready to go straight into the national side. We see it in other countries, and we criticise sometimes about that, but it's about the physical and mental development and where these guys are at. I think the acceleration, the improvement that Gavin Coombs has shown if he can take that on and build on that for Munster, there's no reason why he can't be pushing for a starting berth with Ireland as well.
Go on, Nathan.
No, you go on, Gerald. I'll finish up with just one on the overall makeup of the back row.
Well, okay, I had one last question then about how easy it might be for players to enter this team than it would have been versus the Schmidt team, given the stories that we heard about how everything was so programmed under Schmidt that actually, with Andy Farrell's management style, asking a bit more of the players as individuals, and look, obviously that's shorthand. Maybe it's a bit easier to get into and play well as a kid in this team than it might have been under Joe Schmidt's.
Yeah, well, it's about consistency of performance. If the team starts winning matches, if you win 3 or 4 games and you have one bad outing, I think it's always a given to there's a temptation to go again and give the guys who played poorly an opportunity, particularly if they've delivered before. I was involved in Irish squads over the years where it was harder to get off the team than get into the team. But a lot of that was down to 3 or 4 very good performances, one off day, and then the 3 or 4 good performances came again. They got the opportunity, and that happens. But I, as I said, I made the point earlier, I think definitely with this group now, there's probably more scrutiny and less forgiveness regarding bad performances or one humiliating defeat. Of course, if you lose a game in a narrow game and you play particularly well, you'll get the opportunity. But I think there is that situation now where they've got to add their own voice to a new regime, and I think Andy Farrell is looking to do that. And the one area that we've all kind of questioned is the attack. Physically, we can't make the players into monsters, so we have to find a way, particularly when we play England, South Africa,
maybe France.
Maybe France. Yeah, we did a lot of good things in Paris in the last Six Nations game, the end of October, and maybe a bit of physicality didn't help, but there was mistakes and errors in that second half. So we've seen encouraging signs. I think in November, I thought they finished really well against Scotland and could have won by a lot more. A lot of the players are playing well in Europe, so the signs are pretty good, I think, but the pressure, it all changes very, very quickly if they don't start well against Wales. It's a real backs to the wall game against Wales in that Six Nations, isn't it? So they've got to start well.
Yeah, you probably touched on what I was going to ask there, Alan, which is when you mentioned adding in a burn for physicality for the likes of England or South Africa, that for all the quality that's there and the options in the back row, that it's sort of undermined at times by the performances against England, and that whatever happens against Wales, Scotland, Italy, that if they get beaten up the way they've been beaten by England recently, that it sort of undermines all the good work that they're doing in the other games.
Yeah, but England can do that to most teams now, Nathan. So we've got to accept that, find a different way of playing. There was the biggest issue we had in the England November game was our line-out. I think physically we really got stuck into them, and they didn't steamroll us like they had done in previous 3 games. So it's something that they just got to be mindful of dealing with that physicality. And if you have options, as I said, if you have options to pick bigger players and put second rows and back row into the back row to make it, not alone does it give you a little bit more physicality, but it gives you an extra line-out option as well, and you can go after the set piece. So that's where they were let down in November, that line-out over in England. So hopefully Andy Farrell has all these guys fit and ready to go, and that they can create a really competitive environment in training as well and challenge each other and know that one bad game and you're gone.
Yeah, that's going to be the thing that radicalises everything else. Alan, good stuff. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, lads.
Alan Quinlan giving us his thoughts there this morning. It's 9:28. Ron O'Gara is going to join us this Thursday morning at 8:15 to bring us his half-back depth chart. It looks fairly straightforward at the moment, but he's obviously been in conversations with some of the up-and-comers at Munster as well. So we'll talk about that with him in more detail on Thursday as well. OTB AM live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Ronan Savage says on Instagram, Connors at 6, Levy at 7, Doris at 8. I suspect he might be a Leinster fan. Doris Connor Stander. Doris Stander Peter O'Mahony. So a lot of calls for Doris at 6, but I think Doris at 8 is the future that they have decided and anointed at this point. So Doris 8, Stander 7, Peter O'Mahony at 7. So 2 7s, says Nathan. I'd like to see Levy get game time. And then there's no real Levy on the bench. Peter O'Mahony.
Levy's the one, isn't he? It's probably a straightforward decision with Peter O'Mahony at 7 because Levy's not quite there yet. But you're getting a bit of both where O'Mahony's doing the job for you now in really strong form. But you know, actually heading towards a World Cup, that if Levy can get back, like, he's the one there who has that X factor.
Yeah, I don't think you're rushing anything to do with Dan Levy's recovery at the moment. It's like, are you ready for this? Yeah, are you ready for this? You keep going and you add and you layer it on in the hope that you're getting back to the point where he was one of the outstanding players in his position in the world. At the same time, a bunch of these young players coming through, we don't know what their ceiling is going to be, and they've all come through the same system that Dan Levy came through. So, that's the question at Ryan Baird. Do you put him in the team now and give him 2 years playing at 6 before he becomes the second row partner to James Ryan? And at that stage, he's unbelievably experienced, so there's no betting in period. And you've learned what it's like to have 3 second rows on the field.
Or you're putting him in now into a side that isn't firing on all cylinders, and you end up taking a couple of beatings in a Six Nations, and your confidence is ruined, and everybody's questioning you and all that progress at Leinster. You're thinking, is he ready for that step up?
I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, and I suppose that's why they pay these head coaches who pick teams the big bucks.
I guess you're right, Chair.
Yeah, I still think that James Milner at centre-back is the way forward for Liverpool, but we'll see.
I'll tell you, Chair, who's the happiest man today, listening in, and I'm sure he listens in every morning, is Pep Guardiola, who, cruised to victory last night against Crystal Palace, and City barely get a mention.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we all know that they've been anointed league champions. By certainly all the worried Liverpool fans who were trying to up the ante and up the pressure, but it hasn't worked. They've been impervious to it so far. So let's wait and see. Nathan, good stuff. Thanks a million.
Thanks, Chair.
Right, we're live here from 7:30 tomorrow morning. We're going to hear from Wexford hurler Conor McDonald. Plenty of football on GA2 on Tuesday's OTB AM. OTB Sports Radio is live throughout the day, and Off the Ball is back on your radios tonight from 7 o'clock. Let's bring you more from Paul Rouse and Dave McIntyre in conversation with Joe as they get stuck into the biggest sports stories of the weekend. Enjoy.
Very happy to say, to review the Sunday papers, we have Dave McIntyre with us from Virgin Media Television and Professor Paul Rouse from UCD School of History. Gents, you're both very welcome. Paul, I know that tennis story caught your eye. That's a right mess.
Yes, it's. I suppose it's somewhat inevitable that there will be, as sport happens, that there will be COVID attaching itself to every story. What makes this one interesting, of course, is that the quotas on the number of people coming into the country into Australia has led to criticism of the very fact that 1,200 people are allowed in for a tennis competition when there are Australians who are essentially stranded around the world who can't come home. So it is true that the tennis players are themselves outraged, and you can see where that's coming from, that they're outraged that they're going to be quarantined. They're going to be locked up essentially for 14 days. But at the same time, there are other people, Australians abroad, who've been working abroad, who are outraged that they cannot come home, for example, to go to family weddings and so on. So it cuts in different directions, as so much of this COVID story does.
What about Sam Allardyce, Dave, on the front page there, the Sunday Independent, saying, well, look, there's no scientific reason for them not to celebrate collectively. This is just about optics.
Yeah, well, look, it is about optics, really, isn't it? I struggle to disagree with Sam Allardyce on this, and I know that there is a sense, a need maybe for certain symbols and symbolism to be in place around COVID-19 to lead as an example. But I've always wondered why players, for example, in certain sports have to stand apart during the national anthem and then 90 seconds later are grappling with each other at corner kicks. It makes absolutely no sense why subs have to sit apart at the stand with masks on when they've just left the same dressing room as the rest of the squad. They've changed together, they got ready together, they've trained together all week. It's all down to optics, all down to symbolism. But I want sport to continue so that I can forget about COVID-19. I don't need constant reminders of the pandemic while I'm watching a football match. It's an escape for all of us. You can argue about the whys and the wherefores, whether sport should continue, as we have just briefly touched on as regards the Australian Open tennis. But once sport has been given the go-ahead to continue, is there anything to be achieved by taking away further from the game itself? I mean, celebrations have already been destroyed by VAR. Do we want to ruin it even further by not allowing the players to hug each other or to, make contact with each other in any way if they've scored a big goal? Like, how difficult would it be for Liverpool strikers and the rest of the players not to celebrate in the old-fashioned way if they're to score an injury time winner against Manchester United at Anfield sometime later this evening.
Paul, what about maybe the argument that behavioural scientists might make that this is an incredibly powerful, high-profile vehicle to set certain examples?
Yes, behavioural scientists would indeed make that point and would say it repeatedly, I'm sure. But behavioural scientists would also point out that there are reactions inherent which are instinctive and also traditional, and that players, they're not thinking in that moment after scoring. It just happens, and it's. I think it should be understood in that context. With the best will in the world, this is going to continue happening. And if you want an example of how it will continue happening, if there's a late winner in the Manchester-Liverpool match today, a feud which is described as Sicilian between the two clubs, if it was a late winner scored by either club today, watch the celebrations.
Let's get into some of the stories then that you have picked out. Paul, you mentioned in the theme, along the themes of Manchester United, Liverpool, and I'm conscious lots of people listen to this podcast as well on a Monday, so we won't preview the game in any great way. The Observer, they have a magazine included today, Food Monthly, and the centrepiece, I'll hold it up here for people streaming, is Marcus Rashford. So it's all about Rashford. Meals to make with some of the food provided by the Rashford scheme that he's been a part of, and a feature by Tim Adams on Rashford's year. The headline is Rashford 2, Government 0. He brought child hunger to the heart of the national debate. Coaches, charity workers and the footballer himself tell Tim Adams what drives the man who tackled Boris Johnson and won. Why did you pick out this, Paul?
A personal reason. In the first instance, I lived and worked in Manchester in the early 1990s. I lived beside Whitenshaw, where Marcus Rashford is from, and I have been in that estate, Northern Moor, one of the largest council estates in Europe. So I know the area itself that he comes from, number one. Number two, I'm really interested in that intersection between sport and politics and between sport and policy making. That there is a kind of a view abroad that a sports person should kind of almost, shut up and sit to the side. Similarly, a musician should. Well, I would disagree with that. I think you're entitled to make your point and make your statement. What makes Rashford really interesting, though, is that he doesn't just speak about something; he acts. And Rashford acting on the kids campaign for breakfast club funded food for kids during the holidays in England and school dinners for England, it comes after something else that he's done. He's been involved since October 2019 in the provision of food boxes for young homeless people around Manchester. He went on from that into issues around food banks and school kitchens. And it is absolutely true that this year he took on Johnson and the British government. I actually hate the fact that people refer to him as Boris. They took on Johnson and the British government, first of all in June, and second of all in October. And in both instances, the Tory government displayed just how slow learners they are when it comes to dealing with Marcus Rashford. And the upshot of it is that even in October, when the Tory party voted against the extension of the school dinners programme for English kids, and it must be remembered there are 4.2 million children living in poverty in England. When the Tory government voted against the extension of the food provision, the school dinners programme, into the holiday period, Rashford did something really, really simple and really clever. He began to retweet stories of how different communities were acting together to fill this vacuum left by the state. And within a week, that government had caved for the second time and announced a 400 million programme for low-income families during this period. But so it's that act, number one, and also his contribution to the conversation around all of this. If you see Marcus Rashford on Twitter, even when he's abused by people, and by people I mean government politicians in England. So, for example, one MP, Brendan Clark-Smith from the Tory party, called for less celebrity virtue signalling on Twitter. And another one, Ben Bradley, claimed that free school meal vouchers were effectively being used to fund brothels and crack dens in his Mansfield constituency. So even when that, he's just calmly destroyed their arguments on Twitter, number one. And even when the Daily Mail had a go at him. They were unsuccessful. And it comes down again to his calmness and his judgment in doing this, in how he presents himself and how he presents his ideas. And he is relentlessly practical, and rather than just engaging in rhetoric.
Yeah, it's been an extraordinary year in so many ways. I mean, the latest news this week is that the food parcels which were sent out to various families were a disgrace. I mean, if you saw pictures of them, they were truly horrific and nowhere near the amount of money which had been spent on them. And it's Rashford who's on the phone with Johnson then. It's Johnson ringing Rashford, agreeing that it's, quote, appalling and an insult. And as you said, this is one of several now instances where effectively the Tory government have caved in and agreed with Rashford. It says in this piece they're increasingly nervous about that red wall of northern seats that they took in the recent general election, and this is part of that story. Rashford, for his part, I mean, he just comes across as an incredibly genuine person. I don't think that's breaking news to anyone at this stage, but in this piece, and they speak to the workers in the charity Fair Share, which is where he first started getting involved, and they talk about how, you know, his reflex response when he heard that schools were closing was, well, what are kids going to eat? If they're not at school and breakfast clubs are closed, how are they going to be fed? In shorthand, this meant what would lockdown have meant for me, age 7, because he is acting here out of experience. And he's doing other things I hadn't realised. He's writing a book at the moment, Rashford, for kids who are currently in the position he used to be in, because he says their immediate reaction can be to blame the parents. That's from Kelly Hogarth, who works for the charity. I think Marcus wants to equip the children so they can see the bigger picture, which is a really kind of thoughtful thing to do. You know, that wouldn't have occurred to me immediately, but he's writing a book for kids to explain it's not mum and dad's fault necessarily here. Dave, your thoughts on the piece?
He's a 23-year-old, Joe, it's actually quite extraordinary. He's a 23-year-old soccer player who is not just setting part of government policy in when it comes to school dinners and breakfast clubs and in the general treatment of impoverished families. He's driving commitments around that. He's also working with publishers such as Macmillan on a kind of a books for kids program, because he puts this idea of poverty into a general context. And he used, I mean, we all talk about what we did in lockdown from last March and the general survival and that initial wave of people who were trying to bake soda bread and learn a new language. Marcus Rashford used those months when he was injured and could not train, could not play sport, essentially to drive this campaign through online conferences, through engaging with the organisations that were there and doing the hard work behind it. He's not just the public face of something, he's the driving force in it. And that's what comes out from this article. And it came out previously in an absolutely brilliant piece by Daniel Taylor in the Athletic website, which also set out this context. And if there is one disappointment about fans not being present at the Liverpool and United match today, I'll be really interested to see how Liverpool supporters would have reacted to Marcus Rashford today, because we know how splintered the relationship between the two clubs are. But when Marcus Rashford togged out for Man United against Everton before, there was a kind of a sign welcoming him to Everton on the big screen, and the spirit of Shankly Liverpool Supporters Club have been absolutely supportive of everything that Rashford has done in this and have built bridges with a Man United Supporters Club over this. Now, would that survive the raw heat of Manchester and Liverpool match? I'm not sure, but it would have been really interesting to see the reaction of Liverpool supporters to Marcus Rashford.
Dave?
Yeah, Paul's covered most what I was looking at earlier. It's a really good piece, actually, and maybe some of the lesser parts too, and outside of the outrageous achievement and progress that Rashford has made, is there's that mention that Paul has, the fact that he suddenly found himself with a bit more time because he suffered that back injury that was a really debilitating injury, and he pretty much couldn't do anything. So he says he needed something to put his mind to, something that would turn a negative, that was the injury, into a positive. And that's when he started to look around, well, what can I do? And what relates to me in an area that I can help make progress on? And so many other players in a similar situation would have turned maybe to gambling or to partying and breaking COVID restrictions, as we've seen so often over the last few months, or simply doing nothing. It wouldn't occur to them to go down the route that Marcus Rashford did. And it's also a really sad story as well, because we're talking about the United Kingdom, one of the most prosperous and developed countries in the world. And the charity that you mentioned there, Joe, it delivers 2 million meals a week to hungry children. And it says that's nowhere close to coming close to meeting the demand that's actually out there. And I know we have a similar problem in this country. And it just leaves you wondering, it beggars belief how a country like the United Kingdom is in that position. And then the sporting aspect to it, and it's not something that maybe gets discussed too often, but I wonder, has his immense achievements with this charity off the field, how obviously genuine a guy he is and a really world-class human being that he is, has it enhanced his perception as a footballer? Because there are times where I feel that Marcus Rashford gets a little too much credit or a little less criticism than he might ordinarily get if he has a bad game or if he misses a couple of big opportunities. He's so often described as a world-class player. I don't know if he's a world-class player yet. I think he certainly could be in a couple of years' time. But just an added strand to it that I wonder is his immense contribution off the field maybe enhancing his perception as a player on it in some small way.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. To something totally different, page 22 of the Sunday Business Post. This is an interview with Frank Nean by Aaron Rogan. So Frank Nean is the chairman of Greyhound Racing Ireland. Now, 2019 was a bad year for Greyhound Racing in many ways. They were debt-ridden. They sold Harold's Cross, their stadium there in 2018, for €23 million. People in the sport were deeply unhappy. There were 22 weeks of protests from Greyhound owners who were not impressed. And also the Dáil's Public Accounts Committee wanted to know why the Irish state paid twice. I mean, I didn't realise this at the time. The Irish state paid twice the amount that estate agents working for the Greyhound board had estimated the land's value. I hope that's been followed up on. That's madness. Anyway, that's not the point of this piece. So that's the context of 2018 into 19, and there was a sense, OK, the protests have stopped within the sport. They're OK with Harold's Cross being sold. And then in June, that RT Investigates documentary came to light. I don't know if you have seen it, but it made a huge impact on anybody who did see it and was a major talking point. It showed lots of things. 6,000 greyhounds culled by the Irish industry every year. So 6,000 greyhounds just culled every year because they're not fast enough. And the programme was called Running for Their Lives. There was footage of dogs being shot dead for a tenner each at a knackery. Aaron Rogan writes here, in a scene that still gets shared on social media by critics of the industry, the documentary showed one dog clearly nervous on arrival at the yard while the man who brought it waits in his van. A single shot is fired to the back of the dog's head. The man drives off after being handed the dog's collar while his greyhound rides for the last seconds of its life. It could not have painted the industry in a crueler light. So Nean here, the chairman of Irish Greyhound Racing, describes it as a watershed moment. On the back of it, Barry's Tea, FBD Insurance, Connolly's Red Mills, an animal feed marker, they all pulled sponsorship. Fulcha Ireland, Tourism Ireland stopped promoting the sport in their campaigns. Shane Ross warned it would deter people from visiting Ireland. The sport is in danger, so it only happens in 6 countries. Ireland, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, US and Mexico, and even just in the last month, Florida have put an end to greyhound racing as of New Year's Eve. Nean, in this interview, he's defending the sport in effect. He rejects the idea the sport is on the wane. How much do you think the sport got in the budget last year? €19 million was given to greyhound racing. That is a €2.4 million increase on 2020. So the state is still funding this sport very, very nicely. Of the reputation, of the unhappiness people have, he says, an awful lot of people are instinctively against greyhound racing, but they've never been at a greyhound race and they'll never attend one. I suspect, but they have an instinctive dislike of it rather than an actual practical reason for disliking it. We can deal with almost all the practical arguments when they are put up. And he says RTE is out to get them, and public perception is a hard thing, especially when the biggest newsletter in Ireland is against you. It's quite hard to get your message across. In the past, our attitude was to keep our heads down and to just get on with it. That was a mistake, so now we need to make our case. That's a summation of the piece. I mean, it doesn't make the case here. It doesn't get into the content of the documentary in any great way. When he says, well, people who dislike the sport have never been to a greyhound race, you don't need to have been to a greyhound race to have an opinion on what's been happening to greyhounds in this country over however long. And one other point, I mean, geez, the PR here. We probably didn't treat animals terribly well in the past. And like, given the week that's been in the Mother and Baby Home Report, we probably didn't treat animals terribly well in the past, but we didn't treat humans very well either, based on what we've been reading this week. So, you know, you have to learn from mistakes and move on. This is a car crash interview. I just couldn't believe this.
Yeah, it's done absolutely nothing to make the case for the greyhound industry. And I wonder if that was the point and everything. And it might be Shelbourne Park on a Saturday night, and there seems to be a pretty decent crowd. And on that one night of the year that the RTE cameras may be there for live greyhound racing, it's the Irish Derby, and there appears to be a big crowd and an awful lot going on in the background. But I've never really understood the prevalence of the greyhound racing industry in this country. I was very surprised, Joe, when I read, as you did there, how few countries actually have embraced this as a sport in a professional sense. I thought it was all over Europe, for example, but was it 5 or 6 countries you mentioned there? To what end does greyhound racing still exist in this country? I mean, how many people are employed? How important is it to local communities? Is the local greyhound track a vital part of rural Ireland's infrastructure? I'd like a review or a report done into those questions so we could actually figure out whether there is a point to greyhound racing continuing in this country. And I know there are an awful lot of people out there outside of Dublin who feel that in many ways the country has turned their back on them for various reasons across various aspects of Irish life over the last 20, 25 years. And if you were to close down the greyhound industry, that would just be another kick in the face for people who are already struggling badly in rural Ireland. But is there a point to it? Does it bring anything to these communities anymore? I'd like to find out if there is a real point to it, because anyone who saw that documentary, anyone who's read in and around that documentary would have been absolutely appalled. And his point that those who are critics of the industry are those who've never been to a race meeting, that's utterly irrelevant. I mean, people would have similar issues with various sports, various aspects of life without ever having been personally involved themselves. I don't buy that argument at all.
Holly Carnes of the Social Democrats brought this up in the Dáil a while back, talked about phasing out the funding. Wayne McCarthy of the GRI board, the Greyhound Racing Ireland board, described her as an ignorant little girl, was their response, or his response to her anyway, which, to be fair, Frank Nyan here does not defend at all. Basically, Paul, people might be wondering how they're getting funded so much. They've long been coupled with horse racing, as Aaron Rogan points out here. Basically, Department of Agriculture fund both, and the horse racing gets 80% and greyhound racing gets 20%, and that's been going on since 2001. And apparently the Department of Agriculture has sought advice about decoupling the two, so as maybe to not be given over 21 million now, an increase of 2.4 million to the sport. Is there a justification for handing over 21 million given what the RTE documentary showed about the culture in that sport?
I wouldn't attempt to justify it on those terms at all, and I don't think that you could justify it on those terms. I think if you look back at the history of it here, you've used the word industry and Dave has used the word industry here, and this is exactly the way to look at it. In Greyhound Racing Ireland is essentially the latest incarnation of what was originally Bord na Gán, which was established in 1958. And it was established in 1958 as a semi-state body because the state wished to profit from the sale of greyhounds abroad. By the middle of the 1950s, there were about 5,000 greyhounds a year being exported from Ireland for sale. And this builds on a tradition of the sale of Irish dogs abroad, which extended back to the Roman period when there were dogs sent to emperors in Rome from Ireland who had been bred in the country. I'm not, by the way, presenting this as any sort of a justification for why this is fine. I'm just pointing out the history of the context of it. And in exactly the same way that Bord na Gán was set up in 1958 to promote the greyhound industry, it was essentially mirrored while it happened in 1945 with the establishment of the Irish Racing Board to develop the breeding and sale of horses abroad and the general organisation of the industry. I think it's really revealing that you see this, that the vote that is given from the state on any given year to greyhound racing comes from the Department of Agriculture, not from Sport Ireland or from the Department the Department of Sport. It must be seen in the context, just as hare coursing is a related sport, obviously, to greyhound racing. It must be seen in the context of an industry and how it is presented. And if you look at almost all of the stories, or so many of the stories in today's papers, and the papers are full of stories around sport, not just in the sports pages as well, they relate to this idea of sport being both a pastime and something that people enjoy doing, but also essentially the livelihoods of a whole swathe of people in a whole load of different ways. And there's a tension between those two things. And that's the first point. And the second point of it is the mores and traditions of a society change all the time. Society is never just stuck in one way, and it changes. And just because something was acceptable in the 50s or in the 70s or the 80s does not mean that won't change. You can see it with the manner in which certain parts of stag hunting, etc., were banned in Ireland. And so things can change and may change. There is a massive question, though, and in fairness, it is a question that the greyhound industry themselves have raised. If you believe in the banning of greyhound racing, do you also support the banning of horse racing? And it is a really fundamental question that you must ask in terms of how of the sports that you sanction within the society.
At any stage in the piece, is there a coherent argument as to how greyhound racing has improved since that RTE documentary, for instance? He says its traceability has improved, but there's no real detail on that.
It's really scattered, and it would be really interesting. I think Dave's point is well made about a proper report being presented, which offers. And in fairness, it can be hard for somebody to present a very particular case mediated by a journalist in half a page of a newspaper or a page of a newspaper. That's not to criticise the journalist, but there's a limit to what can come across in it. And I think it would be really interesting to see the Greyhound Racing Ireland set out exactly how the sport has changed, exactly how its welfare procedures and policies have improved, and that must be fitted into the context of the state giving over money.
Yeah, it strikes me I'm being a bit harsh saying car crash interview, am I?
I think that's hard. I think that is a bit harsh, Joe.
I think on reflection it is a bit harsh, yeah.
I think it's a bit harsh. I mean, I would disagree with points that he has made in it, but I think that there is an express willingness to change, and there's somebody under pressure here, as well, and trying to both satisfy a wider. Like, I think if you're chasing a story after you've received the Primetime Investigates treatment, you're on the back foot straight away, and if you're on the back foot straight away, everything that you do is perceived within that context. And he's not coming out and justifying what happened previously. I wouldn't doubt his sincerity to try and improve things, but I do think the case is not being made as to how precisely they have been improved.
I think my frustration with it is maybe this is just. I don't like the format. Like, there's a degree. It's a profile interview too, so it's like, on the one hand, he's talking about some of these unbelievably serious issues, and then there's a bisection where it's like, my perfect weekend, early bird or night owl, Twitter, LinkedIn or Instagram, thanks to my children, Twitter. And I just don't think that's
not his fault, though.
But I just don't think that's the right approach on his part to get into to be answering those questions and also these other questions. I just feel alarm bells should have went off there and said, do you know what, let's do one or the other here.
And that's a fair point, and there is also it's never quite clear to me how a profile in a newspaper can necessarily be something that will redeem an industry and redeem the image of an industry. I would have thought it would need something much more substantial to that, and it would be really interesting to know, is this profile part of a wider public relations development or project by greyhound racing in Ireland to restore its image in some shape or form, if that can be done.
Yeah, Dave, I was a bit harsh on it.
Yeah, I think this man is in a really awkward position, and he knows that he's probably going out to battle for an industry that maybe, if it's not quite on its knees, but it certainly has quite real questions being asked of it. And it's an industry he's been involved in and probably given much of his life to. And so you can understand that he's probably a little bit on the defensive. I can definitely empathise with that. But if he was hoping to convince, the naysayers or those on the fence or those with the feeling of indifference towards the greyhound racing industry, that it is a sport that should endure and that should continue to be developed in the years to come, he certainly did win me over. But as Paul said, it's very hard in a short article such as this, where a journalist is maybe firing questions at you, to be able to come out the right side of it. And if there is more opportunity and scope for Greyhound Racing Ireland to maybe show us exactly why they should continue to exist and what the positives are in the industry and why rural Ireland really does need it to continue for another generation, well, I'd certainly be happy enough to hear what they have to say.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters. This